What if the life you are trying so hard to prove to everyone else was never the life you truly wanted? What if freedom is not about having more money, more attention, more possessions, or more approval, but about having the knowledge and courage to make choices that genuinely belong to you? We live surrounded by powerful messages about how our bodies should look, how relationships should work, what success should mean, and how much money we should have. We are constantly comparing ourselves with carefully edited versions of other people's lives. We are taught to chase approval, but rarely taught how to understand ourselves. We are encouraged to make decisions quickly, yet some of the most important decisions of our lives about health, intimacy, relationships, identity, and finances deserve patience, honesty, and reflection. A healthy life begins when we stop asking, "What will other people think?" and start asking, "What reflects my values?" Your body is not your worth. Your relationship status is not your worth. Your income is not your worth. Your past mistakes are not your destiny. Real freedom begins when education replaces shame, communication replaces assumption, responsibility replaces blame, and preparation replaces desperation. Financial freedom is not simply becoming rich. It is creating choices. It is having enough stability to think before you act, enough knowledge to recognize a bad opportunity, and enough discipline to protect tomorrow while living today. The same principle applies to relationships. Love should not require you to disappear. Intimacy should not require surrendering your boundaries. Diversity should not require everyone to be identical. You do not need a perfect life. You need an intentional one. And the most important question is waiting for you. If you continued making the same choices for the next 5 years, would you be proud of where they took you? If the answer is no, change can begin today. Imagine walking into a room filled with people and realizing that every person in that room carries an entirely different story about love, attraction, intimacy, identity, family, and belonging. One person grew up believing sexuality was something that should never be discussed. Another was encouraged to ask questions. Someone else spent years trying to understand an identity that did not fit the expectations placed upon them. One person may associate intimacy with emotional security, while another experiences it primarily through affection, companionship, or physical connection. Some people are comfortable discussing their desires, while others have learned to remain silent. And somewhere among all these differences is a simple truth that is easy to overlook. There is no single human experience that can represent everyone. Sexuality is not a narrow road that every person is expected to travel in exactly the same direction. It is part of the extraordinary diversity of human life, and understanding it requires curiosity rather than assumptions, education rather than shame, and respect rather than judgment. For much of human history, people have tried to simplify one another. We create categories because categories make a complicated world feel easier to understand. We label people according to gender, age, culture, relationship status, appearance, orientation, religion, family background, or social expectations. Labels can sometimes help people communicate their experiences and find communities where they feel understood. But labels can also become cages when we begin believing that a category tells us everything about the person inside it. A label may describe one dimension of someone's identity, but it rarely tells the entire story. A person's sexuality does not automatically tell you how they love. Their gender does not tell you what kind of relationship they want. Their relationship status does not tell you whether they are happy. Their appearance does not tell you their level of confidence. Their income does not tell you their character, and their past does not have to dictate their future. That realization is where meaningful education begins. Instead of asking, "What is this person supposed to be like?" we can begin asking, "What can I learn about this person's individual experience?" That change may sound small, but it transforms the way we approach human relationships. Curiosity creates space. Judgment closes it. When people believe they will be mocked, dismissed, or punished for speaking honestly about their experiences, they become less likely to seek accurate information and more likely to rely on secrecy, misinformation, or fear. But when people are given a safe environment in which questions can be asked without humiliation, education becomes possible, and education is one of the most powerful forms of protection we can give ourselves. Think about the first time many people encounter serious questions about sexuality. It may happen during adolescence, when the body begins changing and suddenly familiar feelings become unfamiliar. There may be attraction, curiosity, embarrassment, uncertainty, or questions that seem impossible to ask aloud. A young person may wonder whether what they are experiencing is normal. They may compare themselves to friends. They may encounter exaggerated stories online. They may hear contradictory messages from family, peers, media, religion, or popular culture. Somewhere in that confusion, they begin forming beliefs about themselves and other people. Some of those beliefs will be accurate. Others may remain with them for years, despite having little basis in evidence. This is why accurate sexual education matters. It is not about telling people what they should desire. It is about giving them reliable information so that they can make informed decisions. Knowledge about bodies, consent, contraception, sexually transmitted infections, relationships, communication, emotional well-being, and personal boundaries can reduce fear and improve decision-making. Education does not remove personal responsibility. It strengthens it. When people understand consequences, they have a better opportunity to make deliberate choices, and this principle extends far beyond sexuality. Financial education works the same way. If someone has never been taught how interest compounds, how debt works, how budgets function, how emergency savings can protect them, or how investment risk operates, they may make decisions that have serious long-term consequences without fully understanding what they are doing. Ignorance can be expensive. Knowledge can create options. The same young person who needs accurate information about sexual health may also need accurate information about money, relationships, mental health, and career planning. Education becomes a foundation for independence. A useful principle to remember is this: the more clearly you understand your choices, the less likely you are to surrender your future to someone else's assumptions. That principle is especially powerful when we discuss diversity. Diversity does not mean that every person must behave differently from everyone else. It means recognizing that human experiences vary and that those variations deserve thoughtful understanding. Two people can share a broad identity and still have completely different experiences. Two women may have different ideas about relationships. Two men may have completely different emotional needs. Two people with the same sexual orientation may have different boundaries and different visions of partnership. Two people in the same relationship structure may attach completely different meanings to commitment. Human beings are individuals before they are categories. That is why respectful communication matters so much. If you want to understand another person, listen to what they tell you rather than assuming you already know their story. Ask questions that invite rather than interrogate. Pay attention to boundaries. Notice when someone seems uncomfortable. Give them the freedom not to answer. And understand that trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned. This is particularly important in intimate relationships. Intimacy is not simply physical closeness. It can involve vulnerability, trust, emotional openness, affection, shared experiences, and the knowledge that you can communicate honestly without being punished for your honesty. A person can be physically close to someone and still feel emotionally distant. Another person can feel deeply connected through conversation and companionship even when physical intimacy is not central to the relationship. There is no single formula that defines closeness for every human being. What matters is mutual understanding. Imagine two people who care deeply about one another but have different expectations. One assumes that spending every evening together is proof of love. The other needs substantial personal space and feels refreshed by time alone. Without communication, the first may interpret distance, rejection, while the second may interpret constant contact as pressure. Neither person necessarily intends to hurt the other. They simply have different models of closeness. The solution is not to determine who has the correct personality, The solution is to talk. What makes you feel connected? What makes you feel overwhelmed? How much personal space do you need? What does affection mean to you? What boundaries are important to you? What do you need from this relationship? These questions can transform conflict because they move people away from accusation and toward understanding. The same approach can be applied to finances. Couples often argue about money as if the argument about numbers when the deeper disagreement about security, freedom, control, or values. One person may save because they grew up with financial instability. Another may spend because they associate money with enjoying the present. One may see a large savings account as peace of mind. Another may see it as money that should be used to create experiences. Instead of immediately asking, "Why do you spend so much?" try asking, "What does money mean to you?" That question can open a completely different conversation. Maybe the person who spends is not irresponsible, but afraid that life is passing too quickly. Maybe the person who saves is not controlling, but terrified of experiencing the insecurity they witnessed growing up. Once the emotional story becomes visible, the couple can work on the practical problem. Financial freedom begins with that kind of awareness. A financial plan is not merely a spreadsheet. It is a reflection of priorities. Before deciding how much to save, it can be useful to decide what you are saving for: security, education, a home, retirement, travel, flexibility, the ability to change careers, the ability to leave an unsafe environment, supporting family. Different goals require different strategies. One of the most useful financial principles is, money is most powerful when it increases your choices rather than your obligations. A larger paycheck does not automatically create freedom if every additional dollar becomes another permanent expense. A more expensive lifestyle can increase dependence on a particular job. A large amount of consumer debt can make it difficult to leave an unhealthy situation. Financial independence, therefore, is not simply about earning more. It is about developing a sustainable relationship with money. Spend consciously, save consistently, understand debt. Build appropriate emergency reserves. Learn before investing. Protect yourself from financial manipulation. Develop skills that increase your earning potential. And remember that your financial plan should serve your life, not replace it. This is particularly relevant to sexuality and relationships because economic dependence can affect personal autonomy. When a person has no access to money, no savings, no independent skills, or no understanding of their financial situation, they may feel trapped in circumstances they would otherwise choose to leave. Financial literacy cannot solve every relationship problem, but it can create additional options. Having options does not mean that you will always leave. It means that staying can become a choice rather than the only available possibility. That distinction matters. Healthy relationships are built on mutual choice, not forced dependence. Love can involve responsibility and sacrifice, but sacrifice should not mean the disappearance of autonomy. Two people can build a life together while maintaining individual dignity. They can share resources while discussing financial boundaries. They can support each other's ambitions. They can make joint decisions while respecting individual preferences. Interdependence can be healthier than either extreme of total independence or total dependence. We should also remember that consent is fundamental to healthy intimacy. Consent is not something that can be assumed because the people are married, dating, attracted to one another, or have been intimate before. Consent is an ongoing process of voluntary participation. A person has the right to change their mind. A person has the right to decline. A person has the right to establish boundaries. And respecting those boundaries is not a burden imposed on intimacy. It is one of the conditions that makes genuine intimacy possible. When people know that they can say no without punishment, their yes becomes more meaningful. That principle deserves to be remembered far beyond sexuality. In everyday life, people need the ability to say no to financial pressure, social pressure, career demands, and relationships that violate their values. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep everyone out. They are guidelines that communicate how we expect to be treated. A healthy boundary might sound like, "I am not comfortable with that," or "I need time to think about this," or "I cannot afford to take on that obligation," or "I am willing to discuss this, but I will not continue the conversation if we insult each other." Those statements can feel difficult, especially for people who are taught that keeping everyone happy is more important than protecting themselves. But constantly abandoning your own needs to avoid disappointing others eventually creates resentment. Self-respect sometimes requires disappointing someone. That does not make you selfish. It makes you human. A powerful motivational principle is, you do not have to abandon yourself to prove that you love someone. This applies to romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships, and even professional environments. You can care deeply about people while maintaining boundaries. You can be generous without becoming financially irresponsible. You can be compassionate without accepting abuse. You can be supportive without becoming responsible for another adult's every emotion. The challenge is learning the difference between generosity and self-erasure. Generosity says, "I choose to give." Self-erasure says, "I must give or I am not worthy." Those are very different psychological positions. The same distinction exists financially. Giving to family can be meaningful. Supporting someone during a crisis can reflect love. But if helping others repeatedly destroys your own financial stability, you may eventually become unable to help anyone. Sustainable generosity requires boundaries. A useful principle is, build your foundation before promising to carry everyone else. That does not mean becoming selfish. It means becoming sustainable. Think of your finances as a structure. If the foundation is unstable, adding more responsibilities can make the entire structure vulnerable. Before taking on additional obligations, understand your own situation. Know what you earn. Know what you owe. Know what you need for basic living expenses. Know what you can realistically contribute. The same principle applies emotionally. If you are already overwhelmed, you may not be able to become everyone's therapist, rescuer, and crisis manager. Supporting people is valuable, but you also need support. This is where community becomes important. One of the myths of modern independence is that strong people should need nobody. But human beings are social creatures. We need connection. We need friendship. We need belonging. We need people who can remind us who we are when circumstances make us forget. Seeking support is not weakness. It is strategy. A financially intelligent person seeks professional advice when appropriate. A person concerned about sexual health seeks qualified medical care. A person struggling emotionally may seek a qualified mental health professional. A person experiencing relationship difficulties may seek appropriate counseling. Knowing when you need expertise is itself a form of intelligence. The goal is not to know everything. The goal is to know what you know, recognize what you do not know, and seek reliable information when necessary. That principle becomes especially important in a world overflowing with information. We now have access to enormous amounts of content about sexuality, relationships, bodies, gender, money, health, and identity. But access to information is not the same as access to truth. Online content can educate, but it can also distort. Algorithms often reward outrage, certainty, novelty, and emotional intensity. A confident statement can spread much faster than a careful explanation. So develop the habit of asking, what is the evidence? Who is making this claim? What are their qualifications? Are they selling something? Are they presenting individual experience as universal truth? Are they distinguishing between correlation and causation? Are they acknowledging uncertainty? Are they using respectful language toward people whose experiences differ? Critical thinking is a form of self-protection, and it is another form of financial protection. Scammers depend on certainty. They promise extraordinary returns. They create urgency. They discourage questions. They tell you that everyone else is missing out. They make complex financial decisions sound effortless. The same psychological vulnerabilities that can make people susceptible to misinformation about sexuality, can make them susceptible to financial manipulation, fear, insecurity, desire for belonging, and the hope for a quick solution. Slow down. Ask questions. Verify. Do not allow urgency to replace judgment. That is one of the most valuable principles you can carry into every area of life. When someone benefits from your impulsive decision, give yourself more time before making it. This principle can protect your money. It can protect your relationships. It can protect your health. It can protect your boundaries. And it can protect your future. Because your future self will eventually experience the consequences of today's choices. Think about that future person. Maybe she is 40. Maybe 50. Maybe 70. What would she want you to understand today? She might say, please take care of your health. She might say, please don't stay where you are constantly disrespected. She might say, please learn how your money works. She might say, please stop comparing your body to impossible images. She might say, please ask questions when you don't understand. She might say, please don't confuse attention with love. She might say, please don't confuse wealth with worth. And perhaps most importantly, she might say, please build a life that gives you choices. That is what financial freedom can ultimately provide, not an endless collection of possessions. Choices, the ability to respond when circumstances change, the ability to reduce dependence on a single source of income, the ability to plan for the future, the ability to protect yourself against emergencies, the ability to spend according to your values. The ability to say no to financial pressure, the ability to create time for the people and activities that matter. And when combined with emotional and relational freedom, financial resilience can become part of a much larger form of personal empowerment. You begin to understand that your life belongs to you, not to society's expectations, not to a partner's assumptions, not to advertising, not to comparison, not to fear, not to a number on a bank statement, not to a label. Your identity is larger than any single category, and your future is larger than any single mistake. That is why diversity should be approached with humility. We do not have to understand every person's experience completely in order to respect their humanity. We can acknowledge differences without turning them into hierarchies. We can disagree about values while still recognizing another person's dignity. We can ask questions without assuming that our own experience is the universal standard. Perhaps the most mature sentence we can learn to say is, "That is not my experience, but I want to understand yours." Those words open doors. They create dialogue. They make room for complexity. And complexity is not the enemy. It is reality. Human sexuality is complex because human beings are complex. Relationships are complex because people bring histories into them. Money is complex because financial decisions are connected to emotions and values. Identity is complex because people evolve. And life is complex because circumstances change. We do not need simplistic answers to live meaningful lives. We need good principles. Respect. Consent. Honesty. Curiosity. Responsibility. Health. Autonomy. Compassion. Financial awareness. Critical thinking. And the courage to keep learning. If those principles become part of how we live, then we can approach sexuality not with shame or sensationalism, but with maturity. We can approach diversity not with fear, but with curiosity. We can approach relationships not as competitions for control, but as opportunities for mutual connection. And we can approach money not as a measure of personal worth, but as a resource that can help create security and freedom. The journey toward that kind of life will not be perfect. There will be misunderstandings. There will be mistakes. There will be difficult conversations. There will be financial setbacks. There will be changes in relationships. There will be moments when you question yourself. But growth does not require perfection. It requires reflection. When something goes wrong, ask what it can teach you. When a relationship ends, ask what you learned. When a financial mistake occurs, examine the system that allowed it. When a boundary is crossed, reconsider how you communicated and what you need to protect. When your beliefs are challenged, investigate rather than automatically defend. And when you discover something new about yourself, allow yourself to grow. The goal is not to become someone who never makes mistakes. The goal is to become someone who learns from them. That is resilience, and resilience may be one of the most valuable forms of wealth you can possess. Money can be lost and rebuilt. Careers can change. Relationships can end. Plans can fail. But if you develop the ability to learn, adapt, and begin again, you carry an asset that circumstances cannot easily take from you. So as we explore sexuality and diversity, let us resist the temptation to search for one universal formula. There is no single sentence that can explain every person's desires, relationships, identity, or choices. Instead, let us learn to recognize patterns while respecting individuality. Let us use research to ask better questions rather than impose rigid answers. Let us understand that education should expand people's capacity to make informed choices, and let us carry that lesson into every other part of life. Learn. Question. Listen. Reflect. Choose. Adapt. Build. Because the life you want is unlikely to appear fully formed in front of you. You construct it from decisions. 1 Informed decision about your health. 1 Honest conversation about intimacy. 1 Boundary that protects your dignity. 1 Financial habit that strengthens your future. 1 Skill that increases your independence. 1 Relationship that gives you mutual respect. 1 Moment when you choose curiosity instead of judgment. 1 moment when you choose patience instead of impulse. 1 moment when you choose yourself without diminishing someone else. Those moments accumulate. And eventually, they become a life. So let your life be a reflection of informed freedom. Let your relationships be places where people can speak honestly. Let your understanding of sexuality be grounded in respect, health, consent, and diversity. Let your financial habits create options rather than unnecessary dependence. Let your boundaries protect your well-being. Let your curiosity remain stronger than your fear. And remember this final principle: the richest life is not necessarily the life with the most possessions. It is the life with the greatest alignment between your values, your choices, and the future you are building. You do not need to have everything figured out today. You only need to remain willing to learn, because every question you ask can become knowledge. Every piece of knowledge can become a better decision. Every better decision can become a healthier habit. Every healthy habit can become greater resilience. And resilience can become freedom. That is the opportunity before us. Not to become identical, but to become more informed. Not to eliminate diversity, but to understand it. Not to control other people's lives, but to take greater responsibility for our own, and not to chase a perfect existence, but to build a meaningful one. Start where you are, learn what you need to learn, protect what matters, respect the autonomy of others, strengthen your financial foundation. Take care of your body. Nurture your relationships, question assumptions, and keep moving toward a future in which your choices are increasingly guided by knowledge, self-respect, compassion, and purpose. That is not merely sexual education, that is education for life. There is a moment in almost every person's life when the simple questions of childhood begin turning into complicated questions about identity, attraction, relationships, and belonging. You may remember the first time you realized that adults did not all agree about what love was supposed to look like. Perhaps you noticed that different families had different rules, different expectations, and different ways of expressing affection. Maybe you encountered someone whose identity challenged assumptions you had never questioned. Maybe you discovered something about yourself that you did not yet have the words to explain. In those moments, the world can suddenly become larger and more confusing. But confusion is not necessarily a problem. Sometimes confusion is the beginning of education. It is the moment when an old assumption becomes too small to contain a new reality. For generations, many people have been taught to think about sexuality as though it were a simple collection of rules. This is normal, that is unusual. This is acceptable, that is unacceptable. This person should behave this way, that person should behave another way. But human beings have never been as simple as those rules suggest. Sexuality develops within bodies, minds, relationships, families, cultures, communities, and historical circumstances. What one person experiences as deeply meaningful may have little significance for another. What makes one person feel safe may make someone else feel restricted. What one person considers romantic may not be another person's definition of intimacy. And because people are different, the most responsible approach is not to force every experience into one universal mold, but to develop the knowledge and empathy needed to understand those differences. This does not mean that every behavior is automatically healthy or that every choice is automatically wise. Diversity and responsibility can exist together. Respecting someone else's identity does not require abandoning critical thinking. Supporting personal autonomy does not mean ignoring consent, health, safety, or consequences. A mature approach to sexuality recognizes both freedom and responsibility. People deserve the ability to make informed choices about their own lives, and they also have a responsibility to understand how those choices can affect themselves and others. That balance is one of the most important ideas we can carry into adulthood. Freedom without responsibility can become recklessness. Responsibility without freedom can become control. Healthy living requires both. We need enough freedom to make meaningful choices and enough responsibility to understand the consequences of those choices. Think about something as fundamental as consent. At its heart, consent is about voluntary participation. It is not simply the absence of the word no. It involves the ability to make a choice without coercion, manipulation, intimidation, or pressure. It requires that people have enough information to understand what they are agreeing to. It requires attention to changing circumstances. It requires respect when someone withdraws their willingness. And it requires recognizing that another person's body and boundaries remain their own. That principle sounds straightforward, yet real life can make it complicated. People may worry about disappointing a partner. They may fear rejection. They may believe that saying no will create conflict. They may feel pressured by social expectations. They may assume that because intimacy happened before, it should happen again. They may believe that being in a committed relationship removes the need for ongoing communication. None of these assumptions creates genuine consent. Healthy intimacy leaves room for a person to change their mind. That is not an inconvenience. That is freedom. And freedom is precisely what gives intimacy its meaning. When two people can choose freely, their closeness becomes an expression of mutual participation rather than obligation. This lesson extends beyond sexuality. Think about financial decisions. If someone agrees to a financial arrangement because they are intimidated, manipulated, or denied important information, that is not meaningful financial autonomy either. Imagine a person entering a major debt obligation without understanding the interest, fees, repayment structure, or consequences. Technically, a signature may exist, but informed decision-making has not necessarily occurred. That is why financial education is another form of empowerment. You should know what you are signing. You should understand what you are borrowing. You should know what fees you are paying. You should understand what risks you are accepting. You should know whether a financial opportunity appropriate for your circumstances. A person who understands their finances has more ability to make decisions based on long-term goals rather than pressure. This is where sexuality education and financial education share a surprisingly important principle. Information protects autonomy. When people lack information, other people can make decisions for them. When people have information, they have a greater ability to participate in their own decisions. A motivational principle worth remembering is, knowledge does not guarantee a perfect outcome, but ignorance guarantees that important choices are being made without you. That principle is worth carrying into every area of life. If you do not understand your health, learn. If you do not understand your finances, learn. If you do not understand your boundaries, reflect. If you do not understand a relationship dynamic, ask questions. If you do not understand a claim you see online, investigate it. Learning is not an admission of weakness. It is an investment in independence. And there is another important part of independence: learning to distinguish what you actually want from what you have been taught to want. This can be surprisingly difficult. From childhood, we receive messages about what success should look like. We learn what a good relationship is supposed to look like. We are shown images of beauty. We hear assumptions about masculinity and femininity. We encounter expectations surrounding marriage, children, career, money, and social status. Some of those messages may align with our genuine values, others may not. The danger comes when we mistake cultural expectations for personal desires. Imagine someone who spends years pursuing a high-paying career because everyone around her equates income with success. Eventually she reaches the position she wanted, but discovers that she has no time for friends, family, health, or the activities that make her feel alive. She achieved the goal, but the goal was never truly hers. Or imagine someone who remains in a relationship because everyone around her treats being single as failure. She may appear successful from the outside, but internally she feels increasingly disconnected from herself. Or imagine someone who spends enormous amounts of money trying to maintain a particular image because she believes appearance determines social value. The purchases create temporary confidence, but the financial obligations create long-term stress. In each example, the problem is not ambition, relationships, or spending by themselves. The problem is unconscious living. You can pursue wealth consciously. You can pursue love consciously. You can pursue intimacy consciously. You can pursue independence consciously. The question is whether the choice reflects your values. This is why defining your own version of success is essential. What does enough mean to you? What does a healthy relationship mean to you? What does intimacy mean to you? What does freedom mean to you? What kind of life would make you proud even if nobody else applauded? Those questions are difficult because they remove the comforting simplicity of comparison. If you copy someone else's definition of success, you can always measure yourself against them. But once you define your own values, you become responsible for evaluating your own progress. That can be frightening. It can also be liberating. Financial freedom begins in much the same place. Before you ask how to become financially independent, ask what independence actually means to you. Does it mean eliminating debt, building retirement assets, having enough savings to change careers, owning a home, working fewer hours, supporting family members, creating a business, traveling, having the freedom to take time away from work when life demands it? There is no universal answer. Your financial strategy should support your actual priorities. A person who wants to retire early may need a different approach from someone who simply wants financial stability. Someone with unpredictable income may need a different emergency strategy from someone with a highly stable salary. Someone supporting relatives may have different responsibilities from someone living alone. Financial advice becomes useful when it respects circumstances. That is why simplistic promises should make you cautious. Anyone who tells you that one strategy will guarantee wealth for everyone is ignoring reality. Risk exists. Markets fluctuate. Careers change. Health problems occur. Families have unexpected needs. Good planning does not eliminate uncertainty. It prepares you to handle it. Another principle worth remembering is, financial freedom is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the presence of enough resilience to face uncertainty without surrendering your entire future. That resilience can take many forms. Savings, insurance appropriate to your circumstances. Skills, diversified sources of income where practical, manageable debt, long-term planning, a support network. And financial knowledge. But resilience is not only financial. Emotional resilience matters too. Suppose someone receives rejection. Without emotional resilience, They may interpret it as evidence that they are fundamentally undesirable. They may chase approval from another person immediately, perhaps making choices that do not align with their values. With greater resilience, the same person can experience disappointment while remembering that one person's response does not define their worth. This is a profound lesson in relationships. Rejection is information about a particular interaction. It is not necessarily a verdict on your entire identity. A relationship ending is information about that relationship. It is not proof that you are incapable of being loved. A partner's changing desires are information about a changing situation. They are not automatically evidence that someone is defective. This distinction can prevent enormous emotional suffering. People often turn specific experiences into global conclusions. I was rejected, therefore I am undesirable. My relationship ended, therefore I will always be alone. I made a financial mistake, therefore I am terrible with money. I failed at this career, therefore I have no future. These conclusions are emotionally understandable, but logically excessive. One event is rarely the entire story. A healthier approach is to ask, what happened? What can I learn? And what do I want to do next? That question creates movement, and movement is essential. You cannot control everything that happens to you. You can influence what you do next. This is the foundation of personal responsibility. You may not control another person's feelings. You can control how you communicate. You may not control the economy. You can control whether you understand your expenses and plan appropriately. You may not control whether someone finds you attractive. You can control whether you treat yourself with dignity. You may not control whether a relationship lasts forever. You can control whether you participate honestly and respectfully. You may not control every health outcome. You can control whether you seek appropriate information and care. The difference between what you can control and what you cannot control is one of the most useful maps for living a calmer life. Spend your energy where it can produce results. That does not mean ignoring things outside your control. It means refusing to build your identity around controlling them. Consider social approval. You cannot make everyone approve of you. If you spend your life trying, you will constantly adjust yourself to other people's expectations. One person wants you to be more traditional, another wants you to be more independent. One person thinks you should prioritize family, another thinks you should prioritize career. One person thinks you should marry, another thinks marriage is unnecessary. One person thinks you should spend money enjoying the present, another thinks every dollar should be saved. If you try to satisfy everyone, you will eventually lose track of yourself. Instead, develop principles, ask what you believe, then remain open to learning. There is an important difference between having values and refusing to reconsider them. Values can guide you without becoming rigid. You can have strong principles while recognizing that new evidence may require you to refine your understanding. This is especially important in discussions about sexuality because social beliefs have changed considerably over time. Many ideas once presented as universal truths were actually cultural assumptions. As societies learn more about human development, relationships, sexual health, and identity, responsible education must be willing to incorporate better evidence. That does not mean abandoning every tradition. It means examining traditions thoughtfully. Ask what purpose a belief serves. Ask whether it protects human dignity. Ask whether it is supported by evidence. Ask whether it allows room for individual differences. Ask whether it creates unnecessary shame. Ask whether it encourages responsibility. Good principles should survive honest questions. Bad assumptions often depend on people being afraid to ask them. This is why conversation is so important. We need spaces where people can discuss difficult subjects without immediately turning disagreement into hostility. A person should be able to ask a question without being labeled immoral simply for being curious. At the same time, people should be able to establish boundaries around conversations that make them uncomfortable. Respect must operate in both directions. The goal is not to force everyone to agree. The goal is to create enough mutual respect that disagreement does not automatically become dehumanization. This becomes especially important in diverse relationships and communities. People bring different cultures, religions, family traditions, and life experiences into conversations about sexuality. What feels obvious to one person be unfamiliar to another. Instead of assuming that unfamiliar means wrong, ask what history produced the belief. Instead of assuming that different means dangerous, ask what evidence supports that conclusion. Instead of assuming that everyone has the same needs, ask what the individual person actually experiences. Curiosity is a powerful antidote to prejudice, and curiosity can be practiced. The next time you encounter someone whose experience differs from yours, resist the urge to immediately classify them. Listen, learn, ask respectful questions. Notice your assumptions. You may discover that the difference is smaller than you expected, or you may discover that the difference is larger. Either way, you have learned something. That is growth. And growth requires humility. Humility does not mean thinking poorly of yourself. It means understanding that your perspective is incomplete. Every person sees the world through a particular combination of experience, culture, education, personality, and circumstance. None of us has the complete picture. That is why conversation matters. Your experience can teach someone else. Their experience can teach you. And when people exchange experiences respectfully, both sides can become more informed. This is also true of financial life. People sometimes assume that anyone who is struggling financially must simply be irresponsible. But financial outcomes are influenced by many factors: income, family circumstances, education, health, geography, economic conditions, debt, caregiving responsibilities, and unexpected emergencies. Individual responsibility matters, but context matters too. Understanding context does not eliminate responsibility. It creates more realistic solutions. If someone is struggling because they lack financial knowledge, education can help. If someone is struggling because expenses are structurally higher than income, the solution may involve increasing income, reducing expenses, changing housing, accessing assistance, or restructuring debt. If someone is struggling because of exploitation or financial abuse, the solution may require safety planning and outside support. There is no single answer. This is why financial freedom should not be treated as a competition in which everyone is expected to reach the same destination at the same speed. Measure progress against your own circumstances. Perhaps last year you had no emergency savings and now you have 1 month of expenses set aside. That is progress. Perhaps you reduced high-interest debt. That is progress. Perhaps you learned how to read your financial statements. That is progress. Perhaps you negotiated better pay. That is progress. Perhaps you started investing consistently according to an appropriate long-term plan. That is progress. Small improvements can compound. The same is true emotionally. Perhaps last year you could not say no without feeling guilty. Now you can. That is progress. Perhaps you used to avoid difficult conversations. Now you can have them. That is progress. Perhaps you used to interpret every rejection as proof that something was wrong with you. Now you can experience disappointment without losing your sense of worth. That is progress. Perhaps you used to stay silent about sexual health because you were embarrassed. Now you ask appropriate questions and seek reliable information. That is progress. Do not underestimate incremental growth. A life can change dramatically through small improvements, repeated over time. There is a reason compound interest is such a powerful financial concept. Growth can build upon previous growth. The same concept applies to habits. A single healthy decision may have limited impact. Repeated healthy decisions can create an entirely different life. One conversation can improve a relationship. Repeated communication can transform it. One saved amount can provide temporary security. Repeated saving can create long-term resilience. One moment of self-respect can feel empowering. Repeated boundaries can reshape your relationships. One educational experience can provide information. Continued learning can transform your worldview. This is why consistency is often more powerful than intensity. You do not need to change everything tomorrow. You need to keep moving. And sometimes moving forward means slowing down. Modern life constantly encourages urgency. Buy now, decide now, respond now, compare now, commit now, upgrade now, invest now, prove yourself now. But important decisions often deserve time. A financial decision may deserve research. A relationship decision may deserve reflection. A sexual decision may deserve communication. A career decision may deserve consideration. Urgency can be appropriate in genuine emergencies, but manufactured urgency is often a tool of pressure. Give yourself permission to pause. A pause is not indecision. It can be wisdom. Before saying yes, ask whether you actually want to say yes. Before spending, ask whether the purchase supports your goals. Before entering an agreement, ask whether you understand it. Before accepting someone's interpretation of you, ask whether it matches your own experience. Before believing a claim online, ask where the evidence comes from. The ability to pause creates space between stimulus and response. That space is where conscious choice lives, and conscious choice is one of the foundations of freedom. There is another powerful form of freedom that deserves attention: the freedom to define your worth independently of other people's reactions. Imagine a woman who has spent years measuring herself through attractiveness. Every compliment feels like a deposit into her emotional bank account. Every rejection feels like a withdrawal. Over time, her sense of worth rises and falls according to external attention. Now imagine she begins developing other sources of identity. She becomes skilled at her profession. She develops friendships based on mutual support. She learns to manage money. She cares for her health. She discovers creative interests. She becomes comfortable with her own company. She builds a life that has meaning beyond romantic approval. Attraction can still be enjoyable. Compliments can still feel wonderful. Romance can still matter. But none of those things has to determine whether she believes she is valuable. That is emotional diversification. Do not put your entire sense of worth into one account. Build multiple sources of meaning. Your character, your skills, your relationships, your creativity. Your health. Your contribution, your curiosity. Your values, your capacity to learn, your ability to help others without destroying yourself. These are forms of wealth. And unlike superficial status, they can continue growing throughout life. This leads to a motivational principle that deserves to be repeated. Build so many meaningful dimensions of your life that one disappointment cannot convince you that your entire life has failed. A breakup should hurt, but it should not erase your identity. A financial setback should concern you, but it should not erase your future. A career failure should teach you, but it should not erase your potential. A rejection should disappoint you, but it should not erase your dignity. This is resilience, and resilience gives you courage. Courage does not mean that you are never afraid. It means that fear does not automatically make your decisions for you. You can be afraid and still ask the question. You can be nervous and still set the boundary. You can feel uncertain and still seek information. You can be disappointed and still continue. You can experience desire and still choose responsibly. You can want love and still refuse to accept disrespect. You can want wealth and still refuse to sacrifice every part of your life for it. That is what balanced freedom looks like. It is not a life without limits. It is a life in which your limits are understood and your choices are intentional. As you move through adulthood, remember that sexuality is only one part of your identity. It can be important, meaningful, joyful, confusing, evolving, or complicated, but it does not need to define the entirety of who you are. You are more than your relationship status, more than your appearance, more than your sexual history, more than your income, more than your career, more than your mistakes. You are a person capable of growth. And that may be the most important message of all. People can learn, people can change, people can recover, people can rethink, people can apologize, People can establish new boundaries. People can become financially stronger. People can become emotionally stronger. People can build healthier relationships. People can develop a more informed understanding of sexuality. The past can provide information without becoming a prison. So take what you have learned and use it to build something better. Ask better questions. Have better conversations. Make more informed decisions. Protect your health. Respect other people's autonomy. Protect your own autonomy. Learn how money works. Use financial resources intentionally. Invest in skills. Build resilience. And above all, remain curious about the extraordinary diversity of human experience. Because when we stop demanding that everyone fit our assumptions, we become capable of seeing people more clearly. And when we see people more clearly, we have a better chance of treating them with dignity. That is where meaningful education begins. Not with the declaration that we already know everything, but with the humility to say, I have more to learn, and the courage to keep learning. Now imagine that you are standing at a crossroads, and every road seems to carry a message about who you are supposed to become. One road tells you to fit in, another tells you to stand out. One tells you that love should look a certain way. Another tells you that independence is everything. One tells you that your body must look a certain way to be desirable. Another tells you that success is measured by income, possessions, or status. And somewhere between all those voices is your own voice, sometimes quiet, sometimes uncertain, asking a much more important question: what kind of life actually feels honest to me? That question is at the heart of understanding sexuality, relationships, identity, and personal freedom. It is also at the heart of financial freedom, because money, like sexuality, is never merely about the surface behavior. Beneath spending, saving, intimacy, attraction, and partnership are human needs, fears, hopes, histories, and values. When we understand those deeper motivations, we stop treating our lives as a series of random reactions and begin treating them as something we can consciously shape. One of the greatest challenges in becoming comfortable with sexuality is learning to separate information from expectation. We live in a world filled with messages about what people should want, how they should look, whom they should desire, how relationships should progress, and what adulthood is supposed to resemble. Some of these messages are subtle. Others are repeated so frequently that they begin to feel like facts. A person may grow up believing that everyone eventually wants the same kind of relationship, that everyone experiences attraction in the same way, that everyone should reach certain milestones by a particular age, or that a person's sexual identity should remain perfectly simple and consistent throughout life. Yet human beings do not develop according to one universal timetable. People differ in their experiences, their identities, their relationships, their levels of desire, their comfort with intimacy, and the meanings they attach to sexuality. This diversity should not frighten us. It should make us more thoughtful. Think about how quickly we make assumptions when we meet someone. We notice a person's appearance and begin constructing a story. We hear that someone is married and imagine we know what their relationship is like. We learn someone's sexual orientation and assume we understand their preferences. We see someone who is single and wonder why. We meet someone who has chosen not to have children and assume they must be selfish, afraid, or incomplete. We meet someone with children and assume parenthood must define their identity. We see someone who dresses differently and attach a personality to them. We see someone with wealth and assume they are secure. We see someone struggling financially and assume they are irresponsible. The human mind loves shortcuts, but people are not shortcuts. A person is a story, and stories require time. That is why one of the most powerful habits you can develop is the habit of asking before assuming. Ask what someone means. Ask what they need. Ask what their experience has been. Ask what they value. Ask what they are comfortable sharing. You do not have to interrogate people to understand them. Often, the most respectful thing you can do is simply listen without immediately trying to correct, categorize, or compare. Listening is especially important when conversations involve identity. For some people, identity is an uncomplicated part of daily life. For others, it may involve years of reflection, uncertainty, conflict, or discovery. A person may spend a long time trying to find language that accurately describes their experience. They may change the words they use as they learn more about themselves. They may decide that a particular label helps them feel understood. They may decide that no label feels quite right. Both experiences can be valid. Identity can provide belonging, but identity should not become a prison. A label can be a map. It should not become a cage. This is an important distinction because human beings naturally want certainty. We want to know who we are and where we belong. We want categories that make the world understandable. But sometimes growth means accepting that you are still learning. You do not have to have a perfectly finished definition of yourself at every stage of life. You are allowed to evolve. That does not mean that every change is meaningless or that identity is simply a temporary preference. It means that human development can be complex, and people deserve room to understand themselves honestly. The same principle applies to relationships. A relationship that made sense to you at 20 may not be the relationship you want at 40. Your priorities can change. Your understanding of yourself can change. Your health can change. Your career can change. Your family responsibilities can change. Your financial circumstances can change. Your expectations can change. The challenge is learning to communicate those changes rather than pretending they do not exist. Imagine a couple who met when they were young. At the beginning, they shared a vision of the future. They worked hard, built careers, and created a home. Years later, one person begins wanting a quieter life while the other wants to take more risks. One wants to travel, the other wants stability. One wants more physical affection, the other is dealing with stress, health changes, or emotional exhaustion. Neither person is necessarily wrong. They have simply arrived at a new chapter. A relationship cannot survive indefinitely on assumptions formed years ago. It needs conversation. What has changed for you? What do you need now? What are you afraid of? What are you hoping for? What can we build together? What can we no longer provide for each other? These questions can be painful, but avoiding them does not make the underlying reality disappear. Honesty may create a difficult conversation today. Avoidance can create years of confusion tomorrow. That is true with money too. A couple can avoid discussing debt, income, savings, spending habits, or financial expectations because they are afraid of conflict. They may tell themselves that love should make money irrelevant. But money does not become irrelevant simply because we wish it would. Financial decisions affect housing, education, healthcare, retirement, family responsibilities, career choices, and daily stress. Talking about money is not unromantic. Sometimes it is deeply caring. If two people are building a life together, they need to know what they are building. What are their financial goals? How do they define security? What are their spending priorities? What debts exist? What obligations do they have to family? How much financial independence does each person want? What happens if one person loses a job? What happens if health changes? What happens if their priorities diverge? These are not signs that a relationship lacks trust. They are signs that the people involved understand that love exists in the real world, and the real world contains bills, emergencies, responsibilities, dreams, and uncertainty. A useful principle is, love can build the foundation, but honest conversations build the structure. This principle applies to intimacy as well. Attraction may begin a relationship, but communication determines whether people understand one another. Chemistry can create excitement, but respect determines whether that connection remains healthy. Shared interests can create companionship, but boundaries determine whether both people remain psychologically safe. Healthy intimacy requires more than desire. It requires awareness. Consider the difference between wanting someone and knowing someone. Attraction can happen quickly. Understanding usually takes time. You can feel intense chemistry with a person you barely know. That feeling can be wonderful. It can also encourage us to fill in the unknown parts of their personality with our own hopes. We see what we want to see. Then reality arrives. This is one reason healthy relationships benefit from patience. Give yourself enough time to observe how someone behaves when they are disappointed, stressed, angry, embarrassed, or inconvenienced. Anyone can be charming when everything is going well. Character becomes clearer when circumstances become difficult. Pay attention to how a person responds to boundaries. Do they respect your no? Can they hear criticism without becoming cruel? Can they apologize? Can they admit when they are wrong? Do they encourage your independence? Do they respect your friendships? Do they support your ambitions? Do they treat service workers and strangers with basic dignity? Do their words match their actions? These questions can tell you more about relationship health than superficial compatibility ever could. And remember that you should ask the same questions about yourself. Do you respect your partner's boundaries? Can you hear no without taking it as a personal insult? Can you communicate your needs without demanding that the other person read your mind? Can you apologize? Can you recognize when fear is influencing your behavior? Can you give another person space without interpreting it automatically as rejection? Self-awareness is essential because it is easy to demand qualities from others that we have not developed ourselves. A healthy relationship is not a contest to determine who has fewer flaws. It is a partnership between two imperfect people who are willing to take responsibility for their behavior. That does not mean tolerating harmful conduct. Compassion should never be used as an excuse to remain in an unsafe situation. Understanding why someone behaves destructively does not require accepting the behavior. You can understand someone's history and still establish a boundary. You can feel compassion and still leave. You can love someone and recognize that the relationship is not healthy for you. That is an important form of maturity. People sometimes believe that leaving means they never truly cared. Not necessarily. Sometimes, leaving is the most honest acknowledgement that a relationship has become incompatible with the well-being of one or both people. The same idea can be applied to financial commitments. People often remain trapped by expenses simply because they once made a decision that created them. But past decisions do not always deserve permanent loyalty. If a financial commitment no longer serves your goals, examine your options. If a subscription is unnecessary, cancel it. If debt has become overwhelming, investigate legitimate restructuring or professional guidance. If a career path is destroying your health, explore alternatives. If your lifestyle requires constant financial anxiety, reconsider whether the lifestyle actually represents success. One of the most liberating financial questions is, what am I paying for that no longer gives me enough value? Sometimes the answer is a subscription. Sometimes it is a possession. Sometimes it is a social expectation. Sometimes it is a career. Sometimes it is the pressure to appear successful. Sometimes the cost is not measured in dollars. It is measured in time. Imagine spending years working extraordinary hours simply to afford a lifestyle that leaves you too exhausted to enjoy it. On paper, your income may look impressive. But if the lifestyle requires you to surrender every evening, every weekend, and every vacation, you may have purchased possessions at the cost of your freedom. This is why financial freedom is ultimately about alignment. Money should help you build the life you value. If your highest priorities are family and health, a financial strategy that sacrifices both indefinitely be mathematically successful and personally disastrous. If your goal is entrepreneurship, your strategy may involve accepting different kinds of risk. If your goal is stability, you may prioritize emergency savings and manageable obligations. If your goal is flexibility, you may place greater value on liquidity and lower fixed expenses. There is no single definition of financial freedom. There is only the question of whether your resources support your values. And this is where sexuality and finances unexpectedly meet. Again, both can be influenced by insecurity. A person may seek romantic attention, because they fear being unworthy, a person may spend excessively. Because they fear appearing unsuccessful, a person may remain in an unhealthy relationship because they fear financial instability. A person may pursue money relentlessly because they fear becoming dependent. A person may use sexual attention as proof of desirability. A person may use possessions as proof of success. In each case, the external behavior may be masking an internal fear. Understanding the fear can change the behavior. Ask yourself, what am I trying to prove? That question can be uncomfortable. Perhaps you are trying to prove that you are attractive. Perhaps you are trying to prove that you are successful. Perhaps you are trying to prove that you are independent. Perhaps you are trying to prove that someone loves you. Perhaps you are trying to prove that you have moved on. But when your decisions become performances for other people, your freedom becomes fragile. Because now other people's reactions determine your emotional state. A healthier goal is to build internal measures of success. Did I act according to my values? Did I treat people respectfully? Did I take care of my health? Did I protect my financial future? Did I communicate honestly? Did I learn something? Did I keep a promise to myself? Those questions are more difficult than simply asking whether people approved of you. But they are more meaningful. A motivational principle worth keeping is, do not spend your life trying to look successful to people who will never live with the consequences of your choices. That applies to money, relationships, sexuality, and career. Other people may admire your expensive car. They do not make the payments. Other people may admire your glamorous lifestyle. They do not experience your exhaustion. Other people may pressure you to remain in a relationship. They do not live inside the relationship every day. Other people may judge your personal choices. They do not carry your private experiences. Listen to advice, consider perspectives, but ultimately, you must live your life. That responsibility can feel heavy. It can also be empowering, because once you accept that your choices are yours, you realize that you have more influence than you thought. You can learn, you can save, you can communicate, you can seek help, you can establish boundaries, you can change careers, you can revise your budget, you can end destructive habits, you can build new friendships, you can take care of your health. You can decide what intimacy means to you. You can decide what kind of relationship you want. You can decide what you are unwilling to accept. None of these decisions guarantees happiness, but they increase intentionality. And intentionality is one of the foundations of a meaningful life. There is another issue we need to confront: the difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy can be healthy. People are entitled to personal space, private thoughts, and boundaries. Not every detail of your life needs to be shared with everyone. Intimacy does not require the elimination of privacy. Secrecy is different when it involves deliberately hiding information that another person has a legitimate reason to know. In relationships, secrecy can destroy trust. In finances, hiding major debt can destroy trust. In sexual health, withholding important information that affects another person's ability to make informed decisions can create serious ethical and health concerns. The answer is not total transparency with everyone. The answer is appropriate honesty with the people affected by your decisions. That distinction matters. Healthy relationships need both boundaries and openness. You do not owe everyone everything, but you should not deliberately deceive people about information that materially affects their autonomy. This is another place where respect and responsibility meet. Now think about health. Sexual health is not simply about avoiding disease. It includes understanding your body, recognizing changes, seeking appropriate medical care, understanding prevention, communicating with partners, and making decisions that respect both your well-being and the well-being of others. Bodies change over time, hormones change, stress changes desire. Medication can influence sexual functioning. Illness can influence energy and intimacy. Aging can change expectations. Pregnancy and reproductive decisions can create new considerations. Mental health can affect desire and relationships. None of these realities should be treated as moral failures. They are aspects of being human, yet people sometimes interpret changes in their bodies as evidence that something is wrong with their identity. They may compare themselves with unrealistic portrayals and assume that everyone else is having a more exciting, more satisfying, or more effortless experience. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to turn a normal human variation into unnecessary shame. Social media makes this worse because we rarely see the complete story. We see curated moments. We see carefully selected photographs. We see people presenting confidence without seeing their private insecurity. We see couples displaying affection without seeing their arguments. We see financial success without seeing debt or family support. We see bodies without seeing the filters, lighting, poses, procedures, or genetics behind them. Comparison is therefore often a competition against incomplete information. Do not measure your private reality against someone else's public presentation. Instead, ask whether you are becoming healthier, wiser, more financially secure, and more aligned with your values. That is a much fairer measurement, and it brings us back to diversity. There is beauty in the fact that people do not all experience life in identical ways. Some people are naturally more social, others need solitude. Some people prioritize romantic partnership. Others build deeply meaningful lives around friendships, family, community, work, creativity, or personal pursuits. Some people experience strong sexual desire. Others experience little or none. Some people want children. Others do not. Some people thrive in traditional relationship structures. Others define commitment differently. The existence of difference does not automatically threaten anyone else's life. It simply means that human beings are varied. The challenge is to determine where personal freedom ends and another person's rights begin. That boundary is critical. You have autonomy over your own body and choices. Another person has autonomy over theirs. You can communicate your preferences. You cannot demand another person participate. You can establish your boundaries. You cannot use your boundaries as a justification to control someone else's identity. You can decide what relationship works for you. You cannot assume everyone else must want the same relationship. This balance allows diversity and responsibility to coexist. It also teaches a broader lesson about society. Freedom becomes sustainable when people understand that their own autonomy exists alongside the autonomy of others. This principle is useful financially as well. You have the right to make choices with your money, but financial agreements create obligations. If you borrow, repayment matters. If you sign a contract, terms matter. If you combine finances with another person, communication matters. If you invest, risk matters. Freedom does not mean freedom from consequences. It means having enough knowledge and agency to choose those consequences deliberately. A strong financial habit is therefore to distinguish between what you can afford and what you can sustain. A purchase might technically fit inside this month's budget, but still create long-term pressure. A home might be technically affordable based on a lender's calculation, but still leave too little room for emergencies, maintenance, savings, or other priorities. A lifestyle might be possible today, but fragile if income falls. Financial resilience asks a broader question: what happens if life does not go according to plan? That question can change how you make decisions. Build margins where possible. Leave room for uncertainty. Do not maximize every available resource simply because you can. A little breathing room can be worth more than a little extra status. This is another principle worth remembering. Margin is a form of freedom. Margin in your budget. Margin in your schedule. Margin in your emotional energy. Margin in your relationships. When every dollar is committed, every minute is scheduled, and every emotional resource is exhausted, even a small unexpected event can create chaos. But when you have some space, you can respond. That is what resilience provides, and the same principle applies to intimacy. Healthy relationships need breathing room. Constant monitoring, constant contact, and constant reassurance can become exhausting. People need room to maintain friendships, hobbies, careers, family connections, and private interests. Independence within a relationship does not necessarily weaken intimacy. Sometimes it strengthens it because each person returns to the relationship with experiences, energy, and a sense of self. A partner should be part of your life. They should not necessarily have to become your entire life. That distinction can protect both people. Build a relationship with yourself. Know what you enjoy. Know what makes you uncomfortable. Know what you value. Know what you are learning. Know what you want to accomplish. Know what kind of treatment you consider acceptable. Then invite another person into that life. This approach creates partnership rather than disappearance. And if you are single, remember that being single is not evidence of failure. It can be a period of learning, exploration, healing, career development, friendship, creativity, or simply living. Relationships can be wonderful, but they are not the only source of meaning. Similarly, being in a relationship does not automatically mean you are emotionally secure. A person can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. Another can spend time alone and feel deeply connected to life. Relationship status is information. It is not a complete measure of well-being. The same is true of financial status. Income is information. It is not a complete measure of worth. A bank balance is information. It is not a measure of character. A career title is information. It is not proof of happiness. An attractive appearance is information. It is not proof of desirability or value. Human worth cannot be reduced to a single metric. When we stop doing that, we become less vulnerable to manipulation. Advertising often tries to tell us that we are incomplete. Buy this and become more attractive. Earn this and become more successful. Wear this and become more desirable. Achieve this and become worthy. But your worth is not a product waiting to be purchased. You can improve yourself without believing that you are fundamentally inadequate. That distinction is crucial. You can exercise because you value health rather than because you hate your body. You can save money because you value freedom rather than because you are terrified of being poor. You can develop your career because you enjoy mastery rather than because you need strangers to admire you. You can pursue intimacy because you value connection rather than because you need someone else to prove that you are worthy. Motivation changes when the foundation changes. Fear says, I must become enough. Self-respect says, I am already worthy, and I want to grow. That is a much healthier place from which to build. Growth becomes an expression of possibility rather than punishment. And perhaps this is one of the most important lessons that diversity teaches us. There is no single correct way to be human. There are healthier and less healthy behaviors, ethical and unethical choices, informed and uninformed decisions, respectful and disrespectful conduct. But within those boundaries, human experience contains extraordinary variation. The goal is not to eliminate difference. The goal is to develop enough understanding that difference does not automatically become fear. We can learn without copying. We can respect without agreeing. We can ask questions without judging. We can maintain our own values without denying someone else's humanity. We can create boundaries without creating hatred. And we can build financial freedom without treating money as the purpose of life. Because ultimately, freedom should give you more room to live. More room to care, more room to learn, more room to connect, more room to create, more room to rest, more room to make thoughtful choices. That is why I would leave you with this principle. The purpose of freedom is not simply to escape limitations. It is to create the space in which your values can become your life. Think about that. If your values are family, create financial and emotional structures that give you time for family. If your values are health, protect your schedule accordingly. If your values are learning, invest in education. If your values are creativity, make space for creative work. If your values are connection, nurture relationships. If your values are independence, Develop skills and financial resilience. If your values are service, find sustainable ways to contribute. Your values should appear somewhere in your calendar and your financial statements. Otherwise, they may only be ideas. A budget can reveal values. So can a schedule. So can a relationship. Look at where your time goes. Look at where your money goes. Look at where your emotional energy goes. Then ask whether those patterns reflect the person you believe yourself to be. If they do, strengthen them. If they do not, change them gradually. Do not attempt to rebuild your entire life in one dramatic weekend. Choose one area. Make one improvement. Repeat. That is how lasting change works. And as you continue learning about sexuality, remember that education is not about memorizing a list of answers. It is about developing the ability to ask intelligent questions, evaluate evidence, communicate respectfully, recognize boundaries, understand diversity, and make responsible decisions. The same skills can make you better with money. Better with relationships, better with health. Better with yourself. Knowledge becomes powerful when it changes behavior. So take what you learn and apply it. Have the conversation you have been avoiding. Check the financial account you have been ignoring. Review the subscription you no longer use. Ask the health question you have been embarrassed to ask a qualified professional. Clarify a boundary. Listen to someone whose experience differs from yours. Challenge an assumption. And give yourself permission to grow. You do not need to become someone else. You need to become more consciously yourself. That is the journey. And it does not end with certainty. It continues through curiosity, because the more we learn about ourselves, the more questions we discover, and that is not a failure. It is evidence that we are alive, changing, and capable of understanding more than we understood yesterday. There comes a point in every person's journey when learning about sexuality stops being merely a matter of discovering facts and becomes a deeper lesson about how we relate to ourselves and to other people. We begin by asking questions about bodies, attraction, relationships, identity, and desire. But eventually those questions lead somewhere much larger. They lead us toward communication, self-respect, responsibility, vulnerability, trust, and the courage to live according to values rather than expectations. This is where sexuality becomes part of a broader education about being human. The challenge is not simply to understand what people do, but to understand the circumstances, emotions, beliefs, and choices that surround those behaviors. Once we begin looking beneath the surface, we discover that healthy sexuality is inseparable from healthy communication, and that healthy communication is inseparable from the ability to respect both ourselves and other people. Consider the difference between being heard and being understood. Someone can hear every word you say and still misunderstand your meaning. A partner might hear, "I need some time alone," and interpret it as rejection. Another person might hear, "I want to spend more time together," and interpret it as criticism. A friend might hear, "I can't afford that," and assume you are being difficult when you are actually protecting a carefully planned financial goal. A person may say, "I'm not ready," and someone else may hear an invitation to negotiate rather than a boundary that deserves respect. Communication becomes healthy when we stop treating conversations as puzzles that must be won and begin treating them as opportunities to understand what another person is actually saying. That requires listening. Real listening is more difficult than it sounds because most of us are preparing a response while the other person is speaking. We are deciding whether we agree, whether we feel insulted, whether we have a better story, whether we need to defend ourselves, or whether we can turn the conversation toward our own experience. We may appear attentive while internally constructing an argument, but genuine listening asks something different. It asks us to pause long enough to understand before responding. It does not require agreement. It does not require surrendering our boundaries. It simply requires curiosity. You can say, "I understand what you're telling me, even though I see it differently." That sentence can change a conversation. It allows to people to disagree without immediately becoming enemies. It also creates a powerful distinction between validation and agreement. Validating someone's experience does not mean declaring that every interpretation they have is correct. You can say, "I can see why that hurt you," without saying, "Everything you believe about the situation is true." You can say, "I understand why you are worried about money," without agreeing that every financial decision should be made from fear. You can say, "I understand that you feel rejected," without accepting responsibility for another person's entire emotional response. This distinction creates emotional maturity. It also protects autonomy. One of the great dangers in relationships is the belief that loving someone means becoming responsible for controlling their emotional experience. But you cannot guarantee that another person will never feel disappointed, jealous, frustrated, insecure, or sad. Your responsibility is to communicate honestly and behave respectfully. Another person's emotions belong to them. That does not mean becoming indifferent. Compassion matters. If your behavior hurts someone, you should be willing to examine it. If you make a mistake, apologize. If you discover that you have misunderstood someone, correct yourself. But compassion should not become emotional imprisonment. You are allowed to care without controlling. You are allowed to apologize without accepting blame for things you did not do. You are allowed to explain without demanding agreement. You are allowed to listen without surrendering your own perspective. These skills become especially important when discussing sexual boundaries. People often assume that because intimacy involves attraction, communication should happen naturally. But attraction does not automatically produce communication skills. Two people can feel enormous chemistry and still misunderstand each other. They can care deeply about one another and still fail to communicate their needs. They can have very different assumptions about what affection, intimacy, exclusivity, privacy, or commitment mean. The solution is not mind reading. The solution is conversation. Ask, clarify, listen, confirm, and understand that consent and boundaries are ongoing rather than permanent contracts. A person's willingness can change. Circumstances can change. Comfort can change. Relationships can change. What was appropriate yesterday is not automatically appropriate today. Respecting that reality is a sign of maturity. A healthy, intimate relationship allows both people to remain agents in their own lives. Neither person should have to disappear for the relationship to survive. Neither should have to surrender their identity, friendships, finances, ambitions, or boundaries simply to prove devotion. This is where the idea of interdependence becomes so valuable. Complete independence can become isolation, while complete dependence can become vulnerability and loss of autonomy. Interdependence offers another possibility to people who can function independently but choose to cooperate. They support each other without treating each other as possessions. They share responsibilities without assuming that every difference is a threat. They make decisions together while recognizing that each person remains an individual. That kind of relationship requires trust, but trust is not blind belief. Trust is built through patterns. If someone repeatedly says one thing and does another, trust becomes difficult. If someone respects your boundaries even when disappointed, trust grows. If someone can admit mistakes, trust grows. If someone handles private information responsibly, trust grows. If someone supports your independence rather than trying to control it, trust grows. Trust is therefore less about promises and more about repeated behavior. This principle applies to finances as well. A person who promises to become financially responsible but repeatedly ignores bills is asking you to trust words that are contradicted by actions. A partner who says they want financial transparency but secretly accumulates debt creates a serious breach of trust. Money requires honesty because financial decisions can affect both people's futures. This is why couples should consider having regular financial conversations rather than waiting for crises. Talk about income, expenses, debt, savings, goals, and responsibilities. Discuss how you want to handle shared costs. Talk about what financial independence means to each person. If one person earns substantially more, discuss what fairness means rather than assuming that equality always means identical contributions. Fairness is not always the same as sameness. One person may contribute more money while the other contributes more caregiving or household labor. One may have greater earning potential at one stage of life while the other provides support that allows that career to develop. Circumstances can change. The important thing is transparency. Resentment often grows where expectations remain unspoken. You thought we agreed. I thought you understood. I assumed you would. I didn't know that mattered to you. These sentences appear in relationships every day. The solution is not to eliminate assumptions completely. That is impossible. The solution is to notice when assumptions are carrying too much weight and replace them with conversations. And here is a principle that applies equally to money and intimacy. Never make someone responsible for expectations you never communicated. If you want more affection, talk about it. If you need more independence, talk about it. If you are worried about debt, talk about it. If you want to save for a particular goal, talk about it. If you have a boundary, communicate it. If you are uncertain, say that you are uncertain. Honesty does not guarantee that the other person will respond exactly as you hope, but it gives them the information necessary to respond authentically. That matters because manipulation often depends on incomplete information. If someone does not know what you actually want, they cannot make a truly informed decision about how to participate. Healthy relationships require informed participation. That principle also matters when making sexual health decisions. People need accurate information about prevention, health risks, contraception where relevant, testing, and medical care. They should be able to ask questions without being shamed for not knowing. They should be able to seek professional care when something concerns them. And they should recognize that internet searches cannot replace qualified medical advice when a genuine health issue is involved. There is no prize for pretending you already know everything. There is strength in saying, I need reliable information. The same humility is valuable in financial life. If you do not understand investing, learn before taking substantial risks. If you do not understand a contract, read it carefully and seek qualified advice when appropriate. If you do not understand taxes, ask a qualified professional. If you do not understand a debt agreement, investigate before signing. If someone promises guaranteed extraordinary financial returns, be skeptical. Financial freedom is built through informed decisions, not magical shortcuts. One of the most dangerous myths about financial independence is that there is always a secret strategy that wealthy people know and ordinary people do not. In reality, sustainable financial progress often involves remarkably ordinary behaviors: spending less than you earn when possible, managing expensive debt, maintaining appropriate emergency savings, increasing useful skills, investing prudently for long-term goals, avoiding unnecessary fees and scams, and allowing time to work in your favor. These behaviors are not exciting. They are powerful. The world often celebrates dramatic success stories because dramatic stories are easier to sell. Someone becomes wealthy overnight. Someone discovers a revolutionary investment. Someone transforms their body in a few weeks. Someone meets a perfect partner and immediately lives happily ever after. Real life is usually slower. Financial freedom is often boring before it becomes beautiful. You save, you wait, you learn, you invest, you repeat. Then one day you realize that an unexpected expense no longer terrifies you. That is freedom. You realize you can consider a career change. That is freedom. You realize you can take time to care for someone you love. That is freedom. You realize that your lifestyle does not require every available dollar. That is freedom. And the same gradual process occurs emotionally. You practice saying no. You learn to communicate. You stop chasing approval. You become more comfortable being alone. You learn to recognize unhealthy patterns. You develop better boundaries. You begin choosing relationships because they enrich your life rather than because you fear being without one. One day you realize that rejection no longer destroys your self-worth, that is freedom to. A motivational principle worth carrying with you is build the kind of inner and financial stability that allows you to choose from strength and instead of desperation. Desperation narrows choices. Stability expands them. This does not mean that everyone can simply save enough money to solve every problem. Economic realities differ greatly. People face unequal opportunities, health challenges, caregiving responsibilities, discrimination, unstable employment, and circumstances beyond their control. Financial education should never be used to shame people for situations that are structurally difficult. Instead, financial literacy should provide tools. Where you have control, use it. Where you lack control, seek support. Where systems create barriers, understand them. Where opportunities exist, evaluate them carefully. The goal is not blame. The goal is greater agency. Agency is also central to sexual health. People need access to appropriate information and healthcare. They need the ability to communicate boundaries. They need freedom from coercion and violence. They need to understand that sexual health includes physical, emotional, and relational well-being, and because people live in different circumstances, education must be sensitive to diversity. Culture influences how people talk about relationships. Religion may shape beliefs about sexuality. Family history can influence attitudes toward intimacy. Gender expectations can affect communication. Economic circumstances can influence relationship decisions. Media can shape expectations. Technology can change how people meet, communicate, and maintain relationships. None of these factors determines an individual completely, but all can influence experience. Understanding context helps us avoid simplistic conclusions. For example, consider a person who has difficulty discussing sexual health with a partner. It might be easy to call them bad at communication, but perhaps they grew up in a family where sexuality was never discussed. Maybe they were punished for asking questions. Perhaps they were taught that expressing desire was shameful. Maybe previous relationships involved ridicule. If we understand the history, we can respond with more compassion. Compassion does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means understanding the starting point. If someone has never learned a communication skill, we can encourage them to develop it. If someone was taught unhealthy beliefs, they can examine them. If someone has experienced trauma, professional support may help. If someone has been financially controlled, rebuilding independence may take time. Progress does not happen at the same speed for everyone. This is another reason comparison is dangerous. You do not know another person's starting line. Someone else's confidence may have been built through years of support. Someone else's financial position may reflect inherited resources. Someone else's relationship skills may come from experiences you cannot see. Someone else's body may reflect genetics, medical treatment, or circumstances invisible to you. Compare strategically, not emotionally. Ask whether you are improving relative to your own previous patterns. If you are healthier than you were, if you communicate better, if you understand your finances better, if you are making more deliberate choices, if you are treating yourself with greater compassion, if you are more capable of respecting differences, those are meaningful measures. Another essential skill is distinguishing desire from obligation. You can want something without needing to act immediately. You can experience attraction without turning it into a relationship. You can desire a purchase without buying it. You can want recognition without chasing every opportunity for approval. You can want financial success without sacrificing every personal value. Desire is information. It is not always an instruction. That principle can be incredibly freeing. When a desire appears, you can notice it. Ask where it comes from. Ask whether acting on it supports your values. Ask what consequences you are willing to accept. Then decide. This creates space between feeling and action. That space is where self-control becomes possible. Self-control should not be confused with repression. Repression is often an attempt to deny or bury an experience. Self-control is the ability to acknowledge an experience without allowing it to automatically dictate behavior. You can acknowledge desire without shame. You can acknowledge attraction without entitlement. You can acknowledge jealousy without turning it into control. You can acknowledge financial anxiety without making impulsive decisions. You can acknowledge loneliness without choosing the first relationship available. Emotional awareness gives you options, and options are a form of freedom. There is another area where this matters deeply: body image. People are constantly exposed to messages about what bodies should look like. These messages can create unrealistic expectations and encourage people to evaluate their bodies as though they were products. But bodies are not products, they change. With age, health, stress, pregnancy, illness, medication, activity, genetics, and countless other factors. A healthier approach is body respect. You do not have to love every aspect of your appearance every day. You can respect your body even on days when you feel insecure. You can care for it because it carries you through life. You can nourish it. Move it in ways that feel appropriate. Rest it. Seek health care when needed. And stop treating appearance as the sole evidence of worth. This is another place where financial thinking can offer an interesting metaphor. You would not evaluate a business solely by the color of its building. You would look at its underlying health, operations, resources, and sustainability. Yet people often evaluate themselves almost entirely through appearance. Look deeper. How is your health? How is your sleep? How is your stress? How are your relationships? How are your finances? How is your sense of purpose? How is your emotional well-being? These dimensions matter. Beauty can be appreciated without becoming a prison, and money can be appreciated without becoming an identity. One of the most dangerous forms of comparison is comparing your entire life with another person's highlight reel. You see someone traveling and assume they are free. You see someone married and assume they are loved. You see someone wealthy and assume they are secure. You see someone attractive and assume they are confident. You see someone successful and assume they are fulfilled. You do not know the entire story. So stop demanding that your life look impressive from the outside. Build a life that feels meaningful from the inside. That may require saying no to certain forms of status. Maybe you do not need the newest phone. Maybe you do not need the most expensive neighborhood. Maybe you do not need to accept every social invitation. Maybe you do not need to maintain friendships that exist primarily around spending. Maybe you do not need to pursue relationships simply because everyone else is pairing up. Financial freedom often requires the courage to live below your means. Emotional freedom often requires the courage to live below other people's expectations. Both require discipline. And discipline is not punishment. Discipline is deciding what matters most and protecting it from what matters less. If health matters, protect sleep. If financial security matters, protect savings. If intimacy matters, protect communication. If independence matters, protect your skills. If family matters, protect time. If learning matters, protect curiosity. Your calendar reveals your priorities. Your bank account reveals your financial habits. Your relationships reveal your communication patterns. Your reactions reveal your emotional triggers. These are not reasons to judge yourself. They are data. Use the data. If your spending does not match your goals, adjust. If your relationships do not match your values, examine them. If your boundaries are repeatedly ignored, strengthen them or reconsider the relationship. If your health is being neglected, change your routines where possible. If your career is consuming everything else, reassess. Self-awareness turns life from a mystery into a process of observation and adjustment. You become the scientist of your own habits. You notice, you test, you learn, you modify, you repeat. But remember that you are not conducting this experiment in isolation. Other people have autonomy too. Their needs matter. Their boundaries matter. Their identities matter. Their choices matter. Healthy relationships are therefore not about finding someone who will always agree with you. They are about finding ways to coexist with difference. You may disagree about money. You may have different social needs. You may have different levels of desire. You may have different hobbies. You may have different backgrounds. You may even change in different directions. The question is whether there is enough mutual respect to negotiate those differences honestly. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there isn't. Not every relationship can accommodate every difference. That is not necessarily a moral failure. Sometimes incompatibility is simply incompatibility. A relationship can end without either person being evil. A career can end without the career being worthless. A financial strategy can change without the previous strategy having been foolish. A belief can evolve without your former self being stupid. Growth often means looking backward with more information. Be willing to say, "I know more now." That sentence can free you from shame. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. Now you have more information. So make a better decision. This principle is particularly useful with money. Perhaps you accumulated debt when you were younger. You cannot change the past. But you can learn how interest works, create a repayment strategy, improve your income, reduce unnecessary expenses, and develop better habits. Perhaps you avoided investing because it seemed intimidating. You can start learning now. Perhaps you spent years chasing a lifestyle that made you unhappy. You can simplify. Perhaps you ignored retirement planning. You can investigate your options now. Do not let embarrassment prevent improvement. The past is already expensive. Do not pay for it twice by refusing to learn. And the same applies to relationships. Maybe you stayed too long. Maybe you communicated poorly. Maybe you ignored boundaries. Maybe you were afraid to ask for what you needed. Learn. Do not turn regret into identity. Turn it into information. A powerful motivational principle is, your past can explain your patterns, but it does not own your future. That sentence is worth carrying into every difficult season. You are not required to repeat the patterns you inherited. You can question them. You can change them. You can build something different. This is where education becomes transformational. Education does not merely give you facts. It can give you new possibilities. You discover that there are different ways to communicate, different ways to build relationships, different ways to understand identity, different ways to manage money. Different ways to define success, different ways to create a meaningful life. And once you know there are alternatives, you can choose. That is why diversity is not simply a topic to be tolerated. It is an invitation to recognize that the human experience is larger than any single perspective. Someone else's life may reveal possibilities you had never considered. Someone else's struggle may teach you compassion. Someone else's resilience may teach you courage. Someone else's mistake may help you avoid your own. Someone else's story may challenge an assumption that you never realized you carried. Listen. Learn. Then decide what aligns with your own values. That is the balance. We do not need to copy every person we meet. We need to become better at understanding people, and we need to become better at understanding ourselves. Because the more clearly you understand yourself, the less vulnerable you become to manipulation. You know your boundaries. You know your goals. You know your financial limits. You know what kind of relationships you want. You know what you are willing to negotiate. You know what you are not willing to sacrifice. You know what success means to you. And when you know these things, saying no becomes easier. No to unnecessary debt. No to financial scams. No to relationships that repeatedly violate your dignity. No to sexual pressure. No to comparison. No to expectations that do not reflect your values. But remember that freedom also includes the ability to say yes. Yes to learning. Yes to love. Yes to responsible pleasure. Yes to new experiences. Yes to career opportunities. Yes to investing in yourself. Yes to friendships. Yes to asking for help. Yes to becoming someone different from who you were yesterday. A meaningful life requires both. The strength to refuse what harms you, and the courage to embrace what helps you grow. That is why I want you to think about freedom differently. Freedom is not simply the absence of restrictions. Freedom is the ability to make informed, responsible choices that reflect who you are and what you value. Financial freedom gives you more options. Emotional freedom gives you more stability. Sexual self-knowledge gives you more informed choice. Healthy relationships give you more connection. Education gives you more understanding. And all of these forms of freedom reinforce one another. When you understand money, you can make better relationship decisions. When you understand relationships, you can communicate more effectively about money. When you understand your boundaries, you can protect your health. When you understand your values, you can spend your time more intentionally. When you understand diversity, you can interact with people with greater respect. When you understand yourself, you can make choices with greater confidence. This is the larger lesson. The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become increasingly intentional. And intentionality is built through practice. Practice listening. Practice asking. Practice saving. Practice communicating. Practice pausing. Practice researching. Practice setting boundaries. Practice apologizing. Practice changing your mind when evidence requires it. Practice treating yourself with respect. Practice extending that respect to others. Over time, these practices become habits. Habits become character. Character influences decisions. Decisions shape outcomes. And outcomes gradually shape a life. So do not underestimate the small things. A 5-minute conversation can prevent months of misunderstanding. A small savings habit can become a financial cushion. A single boundary can change a relationship dynamic. One accurate piece of health information can change a decision. One moment of self-awareness can interrupt a destructive pattern. One courageous question can open a door that fear kept closed. The future is built through these moments, not all at once, but repeatedly. So as you continue this journey of understanding sexuality, diversity, relationships, and personal freedom, remember that knowledge should make you more compassionate, not more judgmental. The more you learn about human complexity, the less reasonable simplistic conclusions become. People are not categories. Relationships are not formulas. Desire is not destiny. Money is not identity. Appearance is not worth. And one mistake is not a life sentence. You have the ability to learn, adapt, and build. You can create a relationship with your body based on respect. You can create relationships with others based on communication. You can create financial habits based on long-term freedom. You can create boundaries based on dignity. You can create a definition of success based on values. And you can create a life that does not need to look like anyone else's to be meaningful. That is the promise of informed freedom, not perfection, not certainty. Not a life without difficulty, but the confidence to meet complexity with curiosity, responsibility, and courage. And perhaps the most important question to carry forward is not, am I living the life other people expect? Ask instead, am I building a life that reflects what I genuinely value? If the answer is yes, keep going. If the answer is no, do not panic. Begin again. You are allowed to revise the plan. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to become more fully yourself. And every informed choice you make today becomes part of the freedom you will experience tomorrow. There is a point in personal growth when information alone is no longer enough. You can read about communication, learn about boundaries, understand the importance of consent, study sexual health, examine cultural differences, and recognize the many forms human relationships can take. But eventually the knowledge has to become practice. The real test is not whether you can explain a principle when everything is calm. The real test comes when emotions are high, when someone disappoints you, when your expectations collide with another person's needs, when you feel insecure, when money becomes tight, when a relationship changes, or when the world around you pressures you to make a decision before you are ready. In those moments, education becomes character. What you know matters, but what you do with what you know matters even more. Imagine a young person standing in front of a mirror, wondering whether they are normal. They have seen images online, heard jokes from friends, absorbed expectations from family, and encountered countless opinions about what a person's body, identity, attraction, or relationship life should look like. They look at themselves and wonder whether they fit the picture. Perhaps they do not. Perhaps they never will. And maybe the most important thing that person needs to hear is that human beings were never designed to fit perfectly into a single picture. Variation is part of humanity. People differ in appearance, personality, culture, identity, attraction, relationships, values, and life goals. The objective of education is not to make everyone identical. It is to provide people with enough knowledge and critical thinking to make responsible decisions while respecting the legitimate differences that exist among human beings. This does not mean abandoning standards of health or ethics. Diversity should never be confused with the absence of responsibility. A person's individuality deserves respect, but so do the principles that protect human well-being. Consent matters, honesty matters, safety matters, mutual respect matters, freedom from coercion matters, access to accurate health information matters, the ability to make informed decisions matters. These principles provide a foundation within which diversity can exist. Think about a house. Every room may have different furniture, colors, and purposes, but the building still needs a foundation. Human lives are similar. People may build very different lives, but certain principles help those lives remain healthy and sustainable. Respect is one of those principles. So is responsibility. So is informed choice. Informed choice sounds simple, but it is one of the most powerful concepts in adult life. A decision is stronger when the person making it understands the relevant information and has the freedom to consider that information without coercion. This applies to sexual decisions, healthcare decisions, relationship decisions, educational choices, career choices, and financial decisions. The more significant the decision, the more important informed participation becomes. This is why learning to ask questions is such an important life skill. Do not be embarrassed to ask what you do not know. Ask a qualified healthcare professional about a health concern. Ask questions before signing a financial contract. Ask a partner what they mean instead of guessing. Ask yourself why a particular decision feels urgent. Ask whether information is coming from evidence or from someone's opinion. Ask what the possible consequences are. Ask what you would advise a friend in the same situation. Questions slow down impulsive decision-making, and slowing down can protect your future. Our culture frequently rewards speed. We are encouraged to respond immediately, purchase immediately, commit immediately, react immediately, and display our lives immediately. Yet some of the most important choices deserve patience. You do not have to make every decision at the speed of a notification. Pause, think, research, talk, then decide. That habit alone can transform a life. Consider financial decisions. Someone receives an unexpected amount of money and immediately spends it because they feel that they deserve a reward. The purchase creates temporary excitement, but the money could have helped build an emergency fund or reduce expensive debt. Another person sees an investment advertised online and feels afraid of missing out. They invest without understanding the risk. Someone else signs a loan agreement because they are embarrassed to admit that they do not understand the terms. Later, they discover costs they never anticipated. In each situation, urgency weakens judgment. Financial freedom is rarely created by reacting emotionally to every opportunity. It is created by developing a system. Know what comes in. Know what goes out. Understand your obligations. Build appropriate savings. Manage costly debt. Learn about investing before committing significant money. Protect yourself from scams. Increase your earning potential through useful skills and give long-term strategies enough time to work. 1 of the most useful financial principles is this: do not confuse movement with progress. Being constantly busy with money does not necessarily mean you are becoming wealthier. Opening multiple accounts without understanding them is not necessarily progress. Buying things because they are discounted is not necessarily saving. Chasing every investment trend is not necessarily investing. Working endless hours without improving your financial position is not necessarily advancement. Progress means moving toward a meaningful objective. The same principle applies to relationships. Constant communication is not necessarily healthy communication. Spending every minute together is not necessarily intimacy. Having many relationships is not necessarily connection. Arguing frequently does not necessarily mean that a relationship is passionate. Avoiding every disagreement does not necessarily mean that a relationship is peaceful. Look at the underlying quality. Can you speak honestly? Can you disagree safely? Can you maintain boundaries? Can you celebrate each other's successes? Can you ask for help? Can you respect each other's independence? Can you address problems without humiliation or intimidation? Can you change together? These questions are more valuable than simply asking whether a relationship looks perfect from the outside. A healthy relationship does not require two people to have identical personalities. In fact, differences can become sources of growth when handled respectfully. One person may be highly social while another prefers quiet environments. One may be highly organized while the other is spontaneous. One may love planning while the other enjoys improvisation. These differences can create friction, but they can also create balance. The key is negotiation. Negotiation is not a sign that love is weak. It is evidence that two separate people are trying to build a shared life. You cannot assume that your preferred way of doing things is automatically the correct way. Ask what works for both people. Identify what is flexible and what is not. Learn which differences are manageable and which differences represent fundamental incompatibility. This is a lesson that applies to sexuality too. People can have different levels of desire, different preferences, different comfort zones, and different expectations about intimacy. The answer to difference is not pressure. It is communication and mutual respect. Nobody should have to surrender their boundaries to prove love. Nobody should have to participate in something they do not want in order to prevent another person's disappointment. Nobody should be treated as an object whose purpose is to satisfy someone else's desires. At the same time, relationships require honesty about needs. If two people have significantly different expectations, pretending that the difference does not exist will not solve it. Honest conversation allows people to determine whether compromise is possible. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, and recognizing incompatibility can be painful. But it can also be healthier than forcing two people into a relationship that continually violates their needs. This is one of the reasons self-knowledge matters so much. If you do not know your own boundaries, you may discover them only after someone crosses them. If you do not know your financial priorities, you may spend years following someone else's definition of success. If you do not know your values, you may constantly change yourself to receive approval. Self-knowledge is not selfishness. It is preparation for responsible choice. Ask yourself what makes you feel respected. Ask what makes you feel unsafe. Ask which values are negotiable and which are fundamental. Ask what kind of relationship you want. Ask what kind of life you want when nobody is watching. Ask how much financial risk you are genuinely comfortable accepting. Ask what you want your money to accomplish. Ask what you are willing to sacrifice for your goals and what you are not willing to sacrifice. The answers may evolve. That is okay. A mature person does not need to have the same priorities at every stage of life. Your 20s may involve exploration. Your 30s may involve building. Your 40s may involve reassessment. Later years may bring different priorities again. There is no universal timetable. One of the most damaging social pressures is the belief that everyone must reach identical milestones at identical ages. People begin relationships at different times. People marry at different times. Some do not marry. People build careers at different speeds. People accumulate wealth differently. Some become parents. Some do not. Some discover aspects of their identity later in life. Some change careers after decades. Some begin studying when they are older. A delayed milestone is not necessarily a failed life. Sometimes it is simply a different path. Do not allow a calendar to become a judge. Instead, ask whether you are moving in a direction that feels meaningful. This becomes especially important when social media creates the illusion that everyone else is ahead. You see someone buying a home and wonder why you have not. You see someone's wedding and wonder why you are single. You see someone traveling and wonder why your life feels ordinary. You see someone's professional achievement and wonder whether you are falling behind. But you are comparing your complete life to a selected moment from someone else's. That is not a fair comparison. You do not know their debt. You do not know their family circumstances. You do not know their health. You do not know their private struggles. You do not know what they sacrificed. You do not know whether they are genuinely happy. You only see the presentation. So measure yourself against your own trajectory. If you are more informed than you were last year, that matters. If you are healthier, that matters. If you have improved your financial habits, that matters. If you communicate more honestly, that matters. If you recognize unhealthy patterns sooner, that matters. If you have become more accepting of human differences without abandoning your own values, that matters. Progress does not always make noise. Sometimes progress looks like quietly refusing to repeat an old mistake. That may be one of the most powerful forms of growth. Imagine someone who spent years choosing relationships because they feared being alone. Eventually, they realize that loneliness and solitude are not identical. Loneliness is the painful feeling of lacking meaningful connection. Solitude can be a chosen space for reflection, creativity, rest, or independence. Learning to tolerate your own company can reduce the desperation that sometimes causes people to accept relationships that do not respect them. This does not mean becoming emotionally detached. It means becoming capable of choosing companionship rather than desperately needing it to prove your worth. The same idea applies to money. If you are constantly afraid that you will run out, every financial decision can become reactive. You may accept poor working conditions because you feel trapped. You may borrow at unfavorable terms because you feel desperate. You may spend impulsively after receiving money because you fear that security will disappear. Building even a modest financial cushion can create psychological breathing room. That is why emergency savings are more than a financial tool. They can be an emotional tool. A buffer can reduce panic. A buffer can provide options. A buffer can give you time to think. And time to think can prevent desperate decisions. Of course, not everyone has the same ability to build savings. When income barely covers essential expenses, telling someone simply to save more can be unrealistic and discouraging. Financial education must recognize this. The goal is not to shame people for circumstances beyond their control. The goal is to identify whatever levers are available and use them wisely. Maybe the first step is understanding expenses. Maybe it is negotiating income. Maybe it is finding legitimate assistance. Maybe it is addressing high-cost debt. Maybe it is learning a skill that increases future earning potential. Maybe it is seeking qualified financial or social service guidance. Progress begins with reality, not fantasy. And reality includes asking for help. There is a cultural myth that strong people solve everything alone, but human beings are social creatures. We learn from teachers, we depend on healthcare professionals, we consult financial experts. We seek advice from trusted friends. We build communities. We cooperate. Asking for help is not weakness. It is resource management. You would not feel ashamed to use a map when traveling somewhere unfamiliar. So why feel ashamed of seeking guidance in an area you have not yet mastered? Use resources, but choose them carefully. Not every person offering advice is qualified. Not every viral post is evidence. Not every financial influencer is an expert. Not every relationship opinion is universal truth. Not every health claim deserves belief. Learn to evaluate sources. Who is making the claim? What evidence supports it? Are there conflicts of interest? Does the claim promise certainty where uncertainty is normal? Is the information consistent with reputable professional guidance? Can the source distinguish facts from personal opinion? Critical thinking is a form of self-defense. It protects you from misinformation, and misinformation can be expensive. It can cost money. It can cost health. It can damage relationships. It can reinforce prejudice. It can create unnecessary fear. That is why education should not merely provide answers. It should teach you how to evaluate answers. This is particularly important in sexual health because misinformation has historically contributed to fear, shame, stigma, and unsafe decisions. People deserve access to accurate, age-appropriate, evidence-informed education and appropriate health care. They deserve to know that asking a question does not make them immoral. Not knowing something is not a character defect. Knowledge is a tool. Use it responsibly. Another powerful tool is language. The words we use to describe ourselves and others can influence how we think. Language can create connection, but it can also create shame. When we reduce a person to a label, we may forget that there is an entire human being behind the category. Use language carefully. Do not assume someone's identity. Do not make jokes about experiences you do not understand. Do not use someone's vulnerability as entertainment. Do not treat private information as gossip. Respect the names and descriptions people use for themselves where doing so is reasonable and safe. These are small behaviors, but small behaviors shape social environments, and social environments influence whether people feel safe enough to ask for help. If people expect ridicule, they hide. If they hide, problems may remain unaddressed. If people expect respect, they are more likely to communicate. Communication creates opportunities for prevention. This is true in relationships, health, and finances. A person who can talk openly about money may identify a financial problem earlier. A person who can talk openly about sexual health may seek appropriate care earlier. A person who can talk openly about emotional distress may seek support earlier. Silence can protect privacy, but silence can also protect problems. The skill is knowing the difference, and sometimes the bravest sentence is simply, "I need help." There is no shame in that. Another powerful sentence is, "I was wrong." People often avoid admitting mistakes because they believe an apology makes them weak. In reality, accountability can strengthen trust. A genuine apology acknowledges what happened without making excuses. It recognizes the effect of the behavior. It expresses regret. And, when possible, it changes the behavior. "I am sorry you were hurt" can be very different from "I am sorry you felt that way." The first can acknowledge responsibility. The second can sometimes shift attention away from the behavior. Learning to apologize is a relationship skill. It is also a leadership skill. It is a financial skill in the sense that responsible people must be able to recognize when a strategy is failing and change course. The inability to admit a mistake can be incredibly expensive. People continue bad investments because they do not want to admit they were wrong. They remain in unhealthy relationships because leaving would feel like admitting failure. They continue unhealthy habits because changing would require acknowledging the past. But a mistake becomes more expensive when pride prevents correction. A valuable principle is, the cost of admitting a mistake is usually smaller than the cost of defending it forever. Think about that. You can change direction. You can sell an investment that no longer fits your plan. You can leave a relationship that is harming you. You can revise your budget. You can seek treatment. You can apologize. You can learn. You can begin again. Beginning again is not starting from zero. You begin with experience. You begin with information. You begin with lessons. You begin with a clearer understanding of what did not work. That is valuable. And as you grow, you may discover that some of your greatest financial and personal achievements come not from acquiring more, but from needing less. Less approval. Less unnecessary debt. Less comparison. Less clutter. Less drama. Less pressure to perform. Less dependence on external validation. Reducing unnecessary demands creates space. And space is where freedom grows. Financial simplicity can mean fewer recurring expenses and more flexibility. Emotional simplicity can mean fewer relationships built on conflict and more relationships built on trust. Sexual health simplicity can mean replacing myths and anxiety with accurate information and clear communication. Personal simplicity can mean knowing what matters and allowing the rest to become less important. This does not mean that life should be boring. It means that complexity should serve a purpose. Do not collect obligations merely because you are afraid to say no. Do not accumulate possessions merely because everyone else has them. Do not maintain relationships solely because history makes them familiar. Do not accept beliefs solely because you inherited them. Examine. Choose. Release what no longer serves you, but do so thoughtfully. Change for the sake of change is not necessarily progress. The objective is alignment, and alignment means your actions increasingly match your values. If you value health, your habits should reflect it. If you value financial freedom, your spending should reflect it. If you value intimacy, your communication should reflect it. If you value diversity, your behavior toward people should reflect it. If you value respect, your boundaries should reflect it. If you value independence, your skills should reflect it. Your values become real when they influence your behavior. That is why I want you to stop asking only, "What do I believe?" Ask, "What do my actions demonstrate that I believe?" That question can be uncomfortable, but it is powerful. If you say financial freedom matters, but spend every dollar to maintain appearances, your behavior is telling you something. If you say health matters, but continually postpone necessary care, your behavior is telling you something. If you say communication matters, but avoid every difficult conversation, your behavior is telling you something. This is not an invitation to shame yourself. It is an invitation to become honest. Honesty gives you the starting point. From there, change becomes possible, and change does not need to be dramatic. You can begin with one conversation. One appointment, one financial review. One boundary, one habit, one decision to stop comparing yourself. One decision to seek better information. One decision to treat another person's difference with curiosity instead of judgment. One decision can become a pattern. Patterns become a life. So as you continue your journey, remember that sexuality is not something that exists in isolation from the rest of who you are. It intersects with health, relationships, culture, identity, communication, mental well-being, personal values, and the broader circumstances of your life. Understanding those connections can help you make more informed choices, and financial freedom is not separate from that either. Money affects choices. Choices affect relationships. Relationships affect emotional well-being. Emotional well-being can affect health. Health can affect work. Work affects income. Income affects financial security. Every part of life touches another. That is why the goal should not be to become wealthy in one area while becoming impoverished in every other. What good is financial success if you have no time to enjoy your life? What good is professional success if your health is collapsing? What good is social popularity if your closest relationships lack trust? What good is romantic attention if you have no relationship with yourself? Success should be sustainable. That may be one of the most important definitions you can adopt. Sustainable success is success you can continue living with. It leaves room for health. It leaves room for relationships. It leaves room for rest. It leaves room for uncertainty. It leaves room for change. And it gives you enough flexibility to respond when life inevitably surprises you. So build margins. Save when you can. Learn continuously. Communicate clearly. Respect boundaries. Protect your health. Question assumptions. Reject shame as a substitute for education. And remember that another person's life does not have to look like yours for that person to deserve dignity. You do not have to understand every experience before you can treat someone respectfully. You do not have to agree with every choice before you can recognize someone's humanity. and you do not have to abandon your own values in order to acknowledge another person's right to live according to theirs, provided that fundamental rights, consent, and safety are respected. That is mature diversity. Not sameness. Not chaos, not forced agreement, but the ability to live alongside difference while maintaining responsibility. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson we should carry into every part of adulthood. Freedom becomes meaningful when it is combined with knowledge, responsibility, and respect. Freedom without knowledge can become vulnerability. Knowledge without responsibility can become arrogance. Responsibility without compassion can become control. But knowledge, responsibility, compassion, and autonomy together can create something much more powerful. They create agency, and agency allows you to say, with increasing confidence, I understand my choices. I understand my boundaries. I understand that other people have boundaries too. I understand that consequences exist. I understand that I can learn. And I understand that my future is not predetermined. That is a powerful place to stand, not because you know everything, but because you know how to keep learning. And that may ultimately be one of the greatest forms of freedom available to us. There is a moment in every journey of self-understanding when the scattered pieces begin to connect. What once looked like separate questions about the body, attraction, identity, relationships, communication, health, money, confidence, and personal freedom begin to reveal themselves as parts of one larger question. How do I want to live? That question is both simple and enormous. It asks us to look beyond social expectations and examine the choices we make when nobody is applauding, when nobody is watching, and when there is no easy answer. It asks us to consider whether our relationships reflect respect, whether our financial decisions create options rather than unnecessary pressure, whether our understanding of sexuality is based on knowledge rather than shame, and whether our definition of success actually belongs to us. We spend so much of life being told what success should look like. We are encouraged to chase certain careers, relationships, possessions, appearances, and lifestyles. Sometimes these ambitions genuinely reflect what we want. Other times, we inherit them without ever questioning them. We may believe we want a particular kind of relationship because that is what everyone around us seems to pursue. We may believe we need an expensive lifestyle because advertisements have taught us that success must be visible. We may believe our bodies should look a particular way because repeated images have made an artificial standard seem normal. We may even believe that adulthood has a fixed sequence: education, career, partnership, home, children, retirement. But human lives do not always unfold according to a template, and there is nothing inherently wrong with writing a different story. A meaningful life is not necessarily the most conventional life. It is the life that is consciously chosen. That distinction matters because there is a profound difference between conformity and belonging. Conformity says, become what is expected so that you will be accepted. Belonging says, bring your authentic self into relationships where you can be respected. One demands disappearance. The other allows connection without requiring self-erasure. This principle can transform how we think about relationships. A healthy relationship should not require you to become smaller so that another person can feel larger. It should not require you to abandon your friendships, ambitions, financial independence, identity, or boundaries simply to prove commitment. Love should not be measured by how much of yourself you are willing to surrender. Healthy intimacy is not the destruction of individuality. It is the meeting of two individuals who choose to build something together. That means maintaining a relationship with yourself. Continue learning. Maintain friendships. Protect your health. Develop skills. Take care of your financial future. Spend time alone. Explore interests that belong to you. A person who remains connected to their own identity can bring more stability into a relationship than someone who expects the relationship to provide their entire sense of worth. And this brings us to one of the most important principles of emotional freedom: Never make another person responsible for creating the identity you refuse to build for yourself. A partner can love you. They cannot permanently convince you that you are worthy if you refuse to believe it. A partner can support you. They cannot live your life for you. A partner can share your financial goals. They cannot eliminate every financial uncertainty. A partner can provide intimacy. They cannot replace your relationship with yourself. This is not an argument against dependence in moments when we genuinely need support. Human beings need one another. Illness, grief, disability, unemployment, caregiving, and difficult life circumstances remind us that independence is never absolute. The point is not to avoid dependence at all costs. The point is to distinguish healthy interdependence from the belief that another person must carry the entire weight of our emotional, financial, or personal existence. Interdependence says we can support one another while remaining whole. That is a powerful model for adulthood. It also changes how we think about financial freedom. Financial freedom does not mean never needing anyone. It means gradually developing enough financial knowledge, resilience, and choice that money becomes a tool rather than a constant source of fear. For some people, that may mean building savings. For others, it may mean reducing high-interest debt. For others, it may mean increasing income, acquiring useful skills, creating a realistic retirement strategy, or simply learning how to manage the resources they already have. The path will differ. The principle remains the same. Make your money serve your life rather than allowing your life to become a servant of money. Money is powerful because it represents possibilities. It can buy necessities. It can create security. It can fund education. It can provide access to healthcare. It can support family members. It can create opportunities to travel, create, invest, or change careers. But money becomes dangerous when it becomes a substitute for identity. If you believe wealth is proof that you are valuable, there will never be enough. There will always be someone richer. If you believe appearance proves that you are desirable, there will always be someone younger, more fashionable, or more conventionally attractive. If you believe relationship status proves that you are lovable, every breakup becomes a verdict on your worth. If you believe career status proves that you matter, retirement or unemployment can feel like an identity crisis. External measures can be useful information. They should not become the foundation of self-worth. That foundation needs to be deeper. You are more than your income. More than your body, more than your relationship status, more than your job, more than your past, more than other people's opinions. Once you understand that, you can pursue improvement without becoming enslaved to comparison. You can save money without worshiping wealth. You can care for your appearance without hating your body. You can pursue relationships without fearing solitude. You can value sexuality without allowing it to define your entire identity. You can build a career without allowing the career to consume your entire existence. This is balance, and balance does not mean giving every part of life exactly the same amount of attention. It means giving important things enough attention to remain healthy. Sometimes work requires more time. Sometimes family requires more. Sometimes your health has to become the priority. Sometimes your finances need repair. Sometimes your emotional life needs healing. Balance is dynamic. It changes with circumstances. The mistake is believing that a good life must always look perfectly organized. Real life is messy. There will be seasons when you are building. There will be seasons when you are recovering. There will be seasons when you are uncertain. There will be seasons when you are grieving. There will be seasons when you are celebrating. The goal is not to avoid difficult seasons. The goal is to develop enough knowledge and resilience to move through them. This is why self-care should not be reduced to luxury. Self-care is not simply buying something pleasant or taking a vacation. Sometimes self-care is going to a medical appointment. Sometimes it is creating a budget. Sometimes it is ending a destructive relationship. Sometimes it is asking for therapy. Sometimes it is sleeping instead of working another unnecessary hour. Sometimes it is saying no to a social event because you are exhausted. Sometimes it is confronting a financial problem you have been avoiding. Self-care can be uncomfortable, but anything that protects your future can be an act of care. Think about preventative health care. People often wait until something becomes unbearable before seeking attention. But prevention is frequently less painful than crisis management. The same logic applies to relationships. Address small problems before resentment becomes permanent. Discuss money before debt becomes a crisis. Talk about boundaries before repeated violations become normalized. Prevention is one of life's quiet superpowers. It rarely feels dramatic. That is exactly why people underestimate it. Financially, prevention can mean maintaining an emergency reserve, avoiding unnecessary high-cost debt, checking important statements, understanding contracts, and being skeptical of offers that promise unrealistic returns. In sexual health, prevention can mean seeking reliable information, communicating with partners, considering appropriate protective measures, and obtaining professional health care when needed. In relationships, prevention can mean discussing expectations, maintaining respectful communication, and addressing recurring problems before they become entrenched. In emotional health, prevention can mean noticing persistent distress and seeking qualified support rather than waiting until the situation becomes overwhelming. The principle is simple. Protect tomorrow by taking today's warning signs seriously. Warning signs are not always emergencies. They are invitations to pay attention. If your spending repeatedly exceeds your income, pay attention. If a relationship repeatedly leaves you anxious and diminished, pay attention. If a health concern keeps returning, pay attention. If you constantly feel pressured to hide who you are, pay attention. If your career consumes your health, pay attention. Your life communicates with you through patterns. Learn to listen. And when you discover a pattern you do not like, resist the temptation to solve everything at once. Sustainable change usually comes from small, repeatable actions. Suppose your finances are disorganized. You do not need to become a financial expert overnight. Start by understanding where your money goes. Then identify essential expenses, discretionary expenses, obligations, and goals. Create a realistic plan. Automate appropriate savings if possible. Review periodically. Improve your knowledge over time. Suppose your relationship communication is poor. Do not begin by demanding perfect communication. Begin by learning to listen without interrupting. Then practice expressing needs without blame. Learn to distinguish observations from accusations. Ask clarifying questions. Schedule difficult conversations when emotions are manageable. Suppose you struggle with body image. Do not demand that you love everything about yourself tomorrow. Start with respect. Stop using cruel language toward yourself. Reduce exposure to media that consistently makes you feel inadequate. Focus on health and functionality rather than endless comparison. Suppose you are uncertain about identity or relationships. Give yourself permission to learn. Seek credible education. Talk to trustworthy people. Consider professional counseling when appropriate. You do not need to force immediate certainty simply because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. Growth can be gradual, and gradual growth is still growth. One of the most important skills in this process is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. We often make poor decisions because uncertainty feels unbearable. We want to know immediately whether someone is the one. We want to know exactly which career will make us happy. We want to know which investment will succeed. We want to know how our bodies will change. We want to know exactly how the future will unfold, but certainty is often unavailable. Wisdom is learning to make responsible decisions despite uncertainty. You can gather information. You can evaluate probabilities. You can identify risks. You can create contingency plans. Then you can act without pretending that you control everything. That is mature decision-making. And it applies to sexuality too. You cannot know everything about another person immediately. You cannot guarantee that a relationship will last. You cannot eliminate every health risk. You cannot predict every change in desire or identity. But you can communicate, you can seek information, you can establish boundaries, you can practice safer choices, you can seek medical care, you can reassess, you can leave situations that become unsafe, you can continue learning. The absence of certainty does not mean the absence of agency. That is an essential lesson. Another essential lesson is that dignity should never be conditional on perfection. People make mistakes. They misunderstand one another. They make poor financial decisions. They enter relationships that do not work. They develop unhealthy habits. They change their minds. They discover that an old belief no longer fits their understanding. The question is, what happens next? Do you hide? Do you blame? Do you double down? Or do you learn? A mature person learns. They say, I did not handle that well. I need better information. I need to apologize. I need to change this habit. I need professional help. I need a different plan. Those statements are not admissions of weakness. They are declarations of responsibility. Responsibility is one of the strongest forms of personal power because it shifts the question from whose fault is this to what can I do now. There will be circumstances you cannot control. You cannot control another person's choices. You cannot control the economy. You cannot control aging. You cannot control every health outcome. You cannot control whether someone loves you. You cannot control whether every financial investment succeeds, but you can control many responses. You can control whether you seek reliable information. You can control whether you communicate honestly. You can control whether you respect boundaries. You can control whether you spend thoughtfully. You can control whether you ask for help. You can control whether you learn from experience. Focus your energy where it has leverage. This is also a financial principle. Do not spend all your energy worrying about market movements you cannot predict. Build a plan appropriate to your circumstances. Diversify where appropriate. Understand your risk tolerance. Maintain reasonable reserves. Invest for the long term if that aligns with your goals. Review your plan rather than obsessing over every daily fluctuation. Your emotional energy has a budget. Do not spend it all on people who repeatedly create chaos. Do not spend it all defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Do not spend it all comparing your life with strangers online. Do not spend it all worrying about things you cannot control. Protect your attention. Attention is a resource. And unlike money, once you spend today's attention, you cannot save it for tomorrow. That is why your digital environment matters. The content you consume influences the expectations you carry. If you constantly consume material that promotes unrealistic bodies, unrealistic relationships, extravagant lifestyles, or sensationalized financial claims, your internal definition of normal may gradually shift. Curate what enters your mind. You do not need to reject the internet. You need to use it consciously. Follow educational sources. Seek diverse perspectives. Check claims. Limit content that repeatedly triggers unhealthy comparison. Remember that algorithms are designed to capture attention, not necessarily to improve your life. Your attention is valuable. Spend it accordingly. This principle extends to relationships too. Give attention to people who reciprocate respect. Nurture friendships that can survive honesty. Invest in family relationships when they are healthy and meaningful. Create communities where people can discuss differences without immediately attacking one another. Diversity becomes meaningful when people move beyond slogans and learn how to coexist. That requires curiosity. If someone has a different cultural background, ask respectful questions rather than making assumptions. If someone has a different relationship structure, do not assume you know their experience. If someone identifies differently from you, recognize that their self-understanding may be more complicated than an outside observer can see. If someone makes a life choice you would not make, ask whether it actually harms anyone before deciding that it is wrong. You can preserve your own convictions while allowing other adults space to make informed choices. That is not weakness. It is confidence. People who are secure in their values do not need to attack. Everyone who lives differently, they can explain their beliefs, they can establish their boundaries, they can disagree, and they can still treat others with dignity. That is emotional strength. It is also useful to remember that diversity includes differences that are not immediately visible. People differ in socioeconomic background, health status, family responsibilities, personality, emotional needs, neurodiversity, religious beliefs, cultural traditions, and life experiences. You rarely know the complete context of another person's choices. Compassion begins with remembering that you do not have the whole story. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means avoiding unnecessary judgment when the facts are incomplete, and when the facts become clear, respond proportionally. Set boundaries when needed. Seek help when necessary. Protect yourself when safety is at risk, but do not turn every difference into a moral emergency. Sometimes, different simply means different. This perspective can make relationships more peaceful. It can also make workplaces more effective, communities more welcoming, and families more connected. Now return to the idea of financial freedom. What would financial freedom actually mean for you? Would it mean retiring early? Would it mean being debt-free? Would it mean having enough savings to leave an unhealthy job? Would it mean supporting your children? Would it mean having flexibility to care for aging parents? Would it mean traveling? Would it mean creating a business? Would it mean simply sleeping peacefully without worrying about the next bill? There is no universal answer. Define it, then build toward it. A goal without a definition becomes vague. A defined goal can become a plan, and a plan can become a series of actions. Perhaps your first financial goal is a small emergency fund. Then debt reduction. Then increased income. Then long-term investing. Then greater flexibility. The exact sequence depends on your circumstances, but the principle is consistent. Convert vague hopes into measurable steps, and remember that financial freedom is not simply about accumulating money. It is about increasing choice. If earning more allows you to work fewer hours, that may be freedom. If saving more allows you to leave an unsafe workplace, that may be freedom. If reducing debt allows you to pursue education, that may be freedom. If learning financial skills allows you to avoid exploitation, that may be freedom. Money is most powerful when it expands your ability to make choices aligned with your values. This is why more is not always the right goal. More income can be wonderful. More savings can be wonderful. More investment assets can be wonderful. But more responsibility, more debt, more stress, more possessions, and more commitments are not automatically improvements. Ask what the additional thing actually provides. Does it create value? Does it increase flexibility? Does it improve health? Does it strengthen relationships? Does it support a meaningful goal? Or does it simply create another obligation? One of the most useful principles I can offer is, do not measure wealth only by what you own. Measure it by how much freedom your resources create. Someone with fewer possessions and substantial flexibility may be richer in freedom than someone with an impressive lifestyle and enormous financial obligations. This is why living within your means can be liberating. It creates room to breathe. Room to save. Room to respond. Room to choose. Room to change. The same is true emotionally. If you do not need constant validation, you have more room to make authentic choices. If you can tolerate being alone, you have more room to choose healthy relationships. If you are comfortable saying no, you have more room to say yes to the things that matter. Freedom grows when desperation shrinks, and desperation often shrinks when preparation grows. Prepare financially, prepare emotionally, prepare educationally, prepare relationally. You cannot prepare for everything, but preparation increases resilience, and resilience does not mean becoming invulnerable. It means developing the ability to recover. You may experience heartbreak. You may lose money. You may make a mistake. You may become ill. You may lose a job. You may discover that a relationship is ending. Resilience says, this hurts, but I can take the next step. Sometimes the next step is very small. Get out of bed. Make the appointment. Open the account. Ask the question. Call the friend. Eat something. Sleep. Review the budget. Take the walk. Make the difficult conversation. Small steps count. There is no shame in rebuilding slowly. And perhaps one of the most important lessons about sexuality, relationships, and financial life is that shame rarely produces sustainable change. Shame says, there is something fundamentally wrong with you. Responsibility says, something needs to change. Those messages are very different. Shame attacks identity. Responsibility addresses behavior. If you made a poor financial choice, address the choice. If you behaved disrespectfully, address the behavior. If you ignored your health, address the habit. If you communicated poorly, learn a better skill. Do not turn one mistake into a permanent identity. You are capable of more than your worst moment. And other people are too. That does not erase consequences. Accountability matters, but accountability and dignity can coexist. You can say, what happened was wrong, and you are still a human being capable of change. That is a much more constructive approach than believing people are permanently defined by one error. It also creates room for forgiveness. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean forgetting. It does not require returning to an unsafe relationship. It does not require abandoning boundaries. Sometimes forgiveness simply means refusing to let anger control the rest of your life. You can release resentment while maintaining distance. You can learn from betrayal without allowing it to define every future relationship. You can recover from financial mistakes without believing you will always be financially irresponsible. You can heal from rejection without believing you are unlovable. You can move forward. Forward is enough. And as you move forward, continue to question the messages you receive about sexuality, relationships, money, beauty, success, and identity. Ask who benefits when you believe you are inadequate. Ask who profits when you believe you need to buy something to become worthy. Ask whether a relationship expectation comes from your own values or from social pressure. Ask whether a sexual health claim is supported by credible evidence. Ask whether a financial opportunity is designed to help you or to exploit your fear of missing out. Critical thinking is not cynicism. It is discernment. You can remain open-hearted without becoming gullible. You can remain hopeful without ignoring warning signs. You can trust people while recognizing that trust should be earned. You can pursue wealth without worshiping it. You can pursue love without abandoning yourself. You can embrace diversity without abandoning responsibility. You can be confident without becoming arrogant. You can be independent without becoming isolated. That balance is the real work. And perhaps the final principle is this: your freedom becomes stronger every time you make a choice based on values rather than fear. Fear says, stay because you might never find anyone else. Values say, I deserve relationships built on respect. Fear says, spend now because everyone else has it. Values say, my future deserves consideration. Fear says, hide because people might judge you. Values say, I will seek trustworthy information and understand myself honestly. Fear says, pretend you know everything. Values say, I am willing to learn. Fear says, you are behind. Values say, I am building my life according to my circumstances. Fear says, you must prove your worth. Values say, my worth does not need to be purchased. That is the shift from performance to authenticity. From impulse to intention. From shame to education. From comparison to self-awareness. From desperation to preparation. From control to respect. From confusion to informed choice. And from simply surviving to consciously building a life. If you remember nothing else, remember this: you do not need to have every answer before you begin living responsibly. You need curiosity. You need reliable information. You need the courage to ask questions. You need the humility to admit what you do not know. You need the discipline to protect your future. You need the compassion to recognize human differences. You need the courage to establish boundaries. And you need the patience to let growth take time. Your life will not unfold perfectly. No one's does. There will be relationships that teach you what you want and relationships that teach you what you cannot accept. There will be financial decisions that work and decisions that become lessons. There will be seasons of confidence and seasons of uncertainty. There will be moments when you feel completely comfortable with yourself and moments when you question everything. That is part of being human. Do not demand perfection from yourself as the price of dignity. Demand honesty. Demand responsibility. Demand learning. Demand respect. And offer those things to other people as well. When you approach sexuality through education rather than shame, relationships through communication rather than assumption, finances through planning rather than impulse, and diversity through curiosity rather than fear, you create a much stronger foundation for adulthood. You begin to understand that freedom is not simply doing whatever you want. Freedom is understanding what you want, understanding what your choices may produce, respecting the autonomy of others, and having enough knowledge and resilience to choose deliberately. That is mature freedom. That is sustainable freedom. And that is the kind of freedom worth building. So look at your life today. Look at your relationships. Look at your health. Look at your finances. Look at your habits. Look at your assumptions. Look at the voices you allow to define you. Then ask one final question. If I continued making the same choices for the next 5 years, would I be proud of where they took me? If the answer is yes, protect those choices. If the answer is no, do not wait for a perfect moment. Change one thing, then another. Learn. Adjust. Continue. Because your future is not created by one dramatic decision. It is created by hundreds of ordinary decisions made repeatedly. The decision to communicate, the decision to save, the decision to learn, the decision to respect, the decision to protect your health. The decision to walk away from what repeatedly harms you, the decision to remain curious, the decision to forgive yourself enough to grow, the decision to allow others to be different without turning difference into hostility, the decision to build a definition of success that belongs to you, and eventually, you may discover that the life you were trying so hard to prove to other people was never the life you truly wanted. Perhaps you wanted peace. Perhaps you wanted meaningful relationships. Perhaps you wanted health. Perhaps you wanted enough money to make choices. Perhaps you wanted the freedom to be yourself. Perhaps you wanted to wake up without constantly feeling that you were falling behind. If so, begin there. Build from values. Build from knowledge. Build from respect. Build from reality. And let every financial decision, every relationship decision, every health decision, and every personal decision move you a little closer to the life you genuinely want. Because the greatest form of success is not having a life that impresses everyone else. It is having a life that you can recognize as your own. And the greatest form of freedom is not having unlimited choices. It is having enough wisdom to know which choices are worth making.